Chapter 1950. Lu Han was enraged and she retorted, "You took an alchemical pill from someone else's body and pretended that it was refined by you." "Silly girl," Ling Han said disdainfully. "What did you say?" Lu Han raised her eyebrows, her anger evident in her words and actions. "Didn't you hear me clearly? Silly girl, silly girl, silly girl." Ling Han said, "Silly girl," 3 times in a row. Lu Han was about to explode with anger, and she wanted nothing more than to pounce on Ling Han and bite him. Since young, when had anyone ever called her a silly girl? Not only was she a genius in martial art, but she was also incredibly beautiful. She had the title of the second most beautiful woman in the wide prosperity heaven. It was normal for men to stare at her. "You're such a blind idiot." "That's mine. It's mine," Ran Fei hurriedly shouted. "Otherwise, the truth would be revealed." "It's yours," Ling Han sneered. "Don't you know that every alchemist has the habit of adding their own brand onto the alchemical pills they refine?" He infused some origin power into the pill, and it instantly glowed. It was possible to vaguely see the word Ling imprinted on the pill. Everyone instantly burst into an uproar. It was clear that this alchemical pill definitely belonged to Ling Han. Otherwise, why would Ran Fei brand his own alchemical pill with the word Ling? Was this a sign of his deep affection for Ling Han? Ran Fei was instantly rendered speechless, and his face instantly turned bright red. This kind of shady business had been exposed in front of everyone, so he was naturally going to lose all face. Lu Han was also speechless. She hadn't expected that Ling Han had really been wrongly accused. Senior brother Ran must have accidentally accepted the wrong alchemical pill, Zhu Zijuan said, casually tossing Ran Fei's responsibility to the side. No one present was an idiot, so they naturally burst into an uproar when they heard this. Zhu Zijuan was far too shameless. He had just wrongly accused Ran Fei, yet now he had completely pushed the blame onto Ran Fei. They had never seen anyone as shameless as Zhu Zijuan. Ling Han didn't care about this for now. He said, "Who else is an alchemist? Please help me appraise this pill." "Leave it to me." Lu Jie smiled. "Although I am not an alchemist, I have some understanding of alchemy. At the very least, appraising it won't be a problem." Ling Han looked at him, nodded, and said, "Then I'll have to trouble brother Lu." He handed the medicinal pill over, and Lu Jie examined it for a moment. "This is a jade cloud pill," he said. "It's one of the most difficult 2-star medicinal pills to concoct. It should be a high-grade pill, and the number of spirit enhancements it can perform is 3-fold. What? 3 times? In an instant, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Even if they didn't know how difficult it was to refine the jade cloud pill, the fact that it had undergone a 3-fold spirit refinement was enough to explain the problem. The 4th refinement was the end point for most alchemists. The 5th refinement could be called a grandmaster. This fellow is too ferocious, isn't he? In terms of martial art, he has stepped into the ranks of emperors, and in terms of alchemy, he has also reached the 3rd refinement. He isn't too far away from the 5th refinement grandmaster. Most importantly, Ling Han was too young. If he could perform the 3rd refinement at such a young age, then the 5th refinement was definitely not an extravagant hope. Yen Wei was completely dumbfounded. The medicinal pill that his opponent had concocted was more difficult than his, and its quality was higher than his. Even the number of spirit enhancements was higher than his. This was a crushing defeat in all aspects. He held onto a sliver of hope and asked, "What about the quality of the spirit refinement?" A 3-fold spirit refinement can be considered perfect, but the 3rd refinement is slightly inferior. However, the imperfections do not obscure the brilliance, Lu Jie evaluated. He really wasn't biased towards anyone, and was speaking the truth. Yen Wei had nothing to say. In truth, even if Ling Han's 3-fold spirit refinement was only ordinary, as long as he had the upper hand in terms of numbers, he would have an absolute advantage. Yen Wei was just struggling on his deathbed, and now his last shred of hope had been shattered. "Emo Shuang, collect the wager." Ling Han snapped his fingers. This was the reason why he was willing to participate in this battle. Otherwise, he wouldn't have bothered to put on such a show in front of everyone. Mo Shuang excitedly collected the wager. He had really profited greatly this time. Although there were some lucky fellows who had bet on Ling Han to win, it was inevitable that others would have a share of the profits. This caused many people to involuntarily glare at Ling Han and Mo Shuang in anger. These two were too much of a scammer. They were clearly so skilled in alchemy, yet they pretended to be pigs to prey on tigers. They were treating them like fools. However, they were willing to accept their losses, so they had nothing to say. Going back on their word was not something that people of their statuses could do. Now, it's time to consider another matter. Ling Han turned to Zhu Zijuan and said, "You too stole my alchemical pills. As your senior, if I don't teach you a proper lesson, others will think that my Zicheng branch has no rules." There was a sinister expression on his face as he spoke these last words. Zicheng, who was the most famous alchemist in the Eastern Celestial Realm. Grandmaster Zicheng. Could it be that Ling Han was alchemist Zicheng's disciple? Grandmaster Zhu Feng was also Grandmaster Zicheng's disciple? Grandmaster Zhu Feng had been expelled by Grandmaster Zicheng, so apart from a limited number of people, no one knew Grandmaster Zhu Feng's background. Now that they heard Ling Han's words, everyone finally connected the two of them. Zhu Zijuan's expression instantly changed. Ran Fei and Shi Yong didn't know about the relationship between Grandmaster Zhu Feng and Zicheng because they were a generation apart. However, he was very clear about this. The fact that Ling Han could mention Grandmaster Zicheng meant that there was indeed a connection between him and Zicheng. Nonsense. Ran Fei and Shi Yong rebuked in unison. This was especially so for Ran Fei. He had been slapped in the face by Ling Han, and his despicable act of stealing alchemical pills had been exposed in front of everyone. He had been thoroughly humiliated, and he hated Ling Han to the bone. "Is that so?" Ling Han asked calmly. "Let's go back and ask Peng Huanyan. I want to see what he says." "You still want to take advantage of my master?" Ran Fei jumped up and said, "You bastard." "Pa." Ran Fei didn't even get a chance to finish his sentence before Zhu Zijuan slapped him across the face. "Shut up." Zhu Zijuan rebuked harshly, causing Ran Fei to swallow the rest of his words. An aggrieved expression appeared on his face as he looked at Zhu Zijuan. "Why did you hit me?" Zhu Zijuan was just about to speak when he suddenly sensed a familiar aura. He immediately turned around and walked toward the back. Nearby, there were two middle-aged men hurrying over. One of them was extraordinarily tall, while the other was short and fat. He looked like a meatball. He faltered for a moment before hurriedly greeting them, "Uncle Ma, Uncle Chen." These two middle-aged men were called Ma Yong and Chen Dong, and they were both Zhu Feng's disciples. Moreover, they had received his true inheritance. They were slightly inferior to Peng Huanyan, but they were both 3-star tier cultivators. Ma Yong and Chen Dong merely nodded at Zhu Zijuan before quickly finding Ling Han in the crowd. They both stepped forward before clasping their hands in greeting and said, "Disciples Ma Yong and Chen Dong pay their respects to fourth uncle." "Fourth uncle?" The crowd instantly erupted into an uproar. No one doubted that Ling Han was Zhu Feng's junior brother anymore. Otherwise, there was no way that Ma Yong and Chen Dong would go crazy together. Meanwhile, Zhu Zijuan and the others' expressions were deathly pale. Ling Han's identity as Zhu Feng's junior brother wasn't a good thing for them. This meant that they would be punished for everything they had done in the future, and they would have to bear the consequences. Reading on cell phones. Chapter 1952. "Brother Ling, come, have a seat," Lu Jie said as he waved at Ling Han. Even if the level of martial art in the wide prosperity heaven was higher, there were still pitifully few monarch tiers. Every single one of them was someone worth recruiting. Ling Han nodded, and accompanied by Lu Jie, they went to the location where the banquet was being held. This was a quiet and elegant garden, with exotic flowers and plants growing everywhere. There was also a pond in the center, with a twin lotus growing there, exuding a refreshing fragrance. Occasionally, a few red carps would float to the surface, faintly discernible between the lotus leaves. This is the heavenly fortune lotus. Ling Han was already familiar with all the celestial medicines in the world, and he immediately recognized it. However, he then showed an expression of disappointment and said, however, it's over 1 billion years old, so it can only be called a pseudo-celestial medicine. The heavenly fortune lotus had to grow for at least 5 billion years before it could absorb enough regulations of heaven and earth to become a celestial medicine. If it couldn't reach this age, it could only be called a pseudo-celestial medicine. Of course, pseudo-celestial medicines were already incredibly valuable, and each one could be sold for an astronomical number of star stones. More importantly, almost no one was willing to exchange celestial medicines for star stones. Basically, it was an exchange of celestial medicines, high-grade cultivation techniques, pseudo-divine metals, and so on. Lu Jie was initially smiling. Basically, only celestial kings were qualified to grow celestial medicines, but he already had one when he was in the severing mundane tier. How astonishing was this? However, Ling Han actually followed up with another sentence, expressing his extreme disdain, which made him feel gloomy. Lu Han immediately covered her mouth and chuckled softly. At first, she had disliked Ling Han, but later it was proven that he was a monarch tier. Monarch tiers were naturally proud, and Ling Han wasn't just a simple prodigy in martial art. He also had astonishing talent in alchemy, which naturally caused her to look at him in a different light. If a person had disliked you at first, then the more they looked at you, the more they would find you displeasing. Even if you spoke eloquently, they would think that you were just playing to the gallery. However, once this impression was corrected, they would become more and more pleasing to the eye. Otherwise, Lu Han definitely wouldn't be amused, and would think that Ling Han was putting on an act. Brother Ling, your standards are really high. Lu Jie shook his head, clearly speechless. Everyone sat down, and naturally, servants appeared like butterflies, serving delicacies. The Holy Sun was treating, so the standard would naturally not be low. The meat was celestial beast meat, and the wine was celestial medicine wine. Of course, the celestial beast was only at the 3rd severance or 4th severance, and the celestial medicine wine only contained a leaf of a celestial medicine. It was naturally impossible to have too many of such precious things. Even so, everyone's faces were glowing. If it weren't for the fact that they were embarrassed, they would have yelled for another serving. Lu Jie didn't say anything at first. Instead, he waited until everyone was almost done eating before he said, I've invited everyone here for a very important matter. Dare I ask, Holy Sun, what's the matter? Naturally, someone else followed up. Lu Jie pondered for a moment before he said, a secret realm of heaven and earth has appeared at the border between the calm peace heaven and our broad prosperity heaven, and it's nurturing a source of heaven and earth. What? Origin of heaven and earth? Immediately, everyone pricked up their ears and revealed looks of excitement. Source powers of heaven and earth were on the level of celestial king tier, and obtaining one would make one invincible among their peers. Even if king tiers and emperor tiers like them obtained it, their battle prowess would increase by another level. Perhaps king tiers would become emperor tiers, and emperor tiers would become monarch tiers. This source power of heaven and earth is called the Blazing Flames Lightning Strike Wood. However, not only has our broad prosperity heaven received news of it, but the calm peace heaven has also received the same news. A celestial king has predicted that this mystery realm of heaven and earth will open in about a year, and the Blazing Flames Lightning Strike Wood will also almost completely mature, becoming a true source power of heaven and earth that can be collected. This mystery realm of heaven and earth can only be entered by severing mundane tiers. At that time, the severing mundane tiers of the 2 great heavens will engage in an intense competition. When Lu Jie finished speaking, many people already showed expressions of disdain. Is the calm peace heaven even worthy of competing with us? I've heard that the calm peace heaven doesn't even have a monarch tier. Any random monarch tier from our broad prosperity heaven would be able to defeat them. That's right. They're only here to join in the fun at most. Only the monarch tiers of our broad prosperity heaven are the true competitors. In the recent 100 million years, the broad prosperity heaven had suddenly risen up. Not only had it shaken off the label of being at the bottom, but the gap between it and the calm peace heaven had also grown wider and wider. It was vaguely showing signs of entering the middle to lower tier. Thus, The younger generation of the broad prosperity heaven was naturally incredibly proud, and thought that the calm peace heaven would only produce a few king tiers at most. Ling Han stroked his chin and said, "Sorry, I'm from the calm peace heaven." When he said this, the surroundings instantly fell silent. How was this possible? A prodigy like Ling Han had actually been nurtured by the calm peace heaven? Brother Ling, you really know how to joke. That's right. A prodigy like Brother Ling is definitely the pride of our broad prosperity heaven. Many people immediately expressed their disbelief, and they all shook their heads. Ling Han couldn't be bothered to argue, and only smiled. Lu Jie hurriedly waved his hand and said, "No matter what, since our Universal Cloud sect knows about this, we naturally have to do our best and fight for this blazing flame lightning strike wood. Holy Sun is right. We have to leave this source power of heaven and earth in Guanhua City." Many people raised their arms and shouted. Who cared if he could do it or not? They had to suck up to him first. Lu Jie nodded and said, "The source power of heaven and earth won't follow you just because you're strong. This is a celestial king tier existence, and it naturally has its own requirements for choosing its master. Thus, we have to do our best to come before the source power of heaven and earth and let it choose its master. There's only one chance. When the source power of heaven and earth appears, if we can't choose the person it approves of immediately, it will disappear into the sky and the earth. Only high-level celestial kings can subdue it. We'll have to wait for countless years before it appears again, waiting for the fated person. Originally, I planned to invite 5 people to form the 7-star brilliance moon formation with my sister and me to increase our battle prowess. But since Brother Ling is here, I believe that the 3 of us should be invincible if we work together. With 3 monarchs working together, what couldn't they deal with? Ling Han was a little embarrassed and said, "I'm really a member of the calm peace heaven, so I can only tactfully decline Brother Lu's kind intentions." Ha! These words naturally caused everyone to burst into laughter again. They only felt that Ling Han was very amusing. Ling Han was speechless. Why didn't anyone believe him when he spoke the truth? "Brother Ling, do you really not want to work together with us?" Lu Jie asked solemnly. If it was just him and Lu Han, they still didn't have much confidence. After all, the top 3 monarchs of the wide prosperity heaven were too freakishly strong. Only with the 3 monarchs working together would he have the confidence to resist that top-ranked monarch. Resist, not defeat. Ling Han shook his head and said, "I've already explained the reason very clearly." Lu Jie also didn't believe that Ling Han was a member of the calm peace heaven, because the image of the calm peace heaven being weak was already deeply ingrained in their bones. He persuaded again, "Brother Ling, if you're afraid that after you work together with us, we'll fight over the blazing flame lightning-struck wood and ruin the harmony between us, then you really don't have to worry. I've already said that the source power of heaven and earth will choose its master. We're just winning a chance to walk before this supreme treasure and give it a chance to choose." These words were spoken with incomparable sincerity. Chapter 1953. But no matter how sincere Lu Jie was, it was useless, because Ling Han was indeed a member of the calm peace heaven. Actually, according to Ling Han, since the source power of heaven and earth would choose its own people, then there was no need to separate them into the calm peace heaven and the wide prosperity heaven. Wouldn't it be better for everyone to work together and walk in front of the blazing flame lightning strike wood? In any case, there was no point in arguing. Unfortunately, no one would accept this idea. Treasures naturally had to be fought over, and whoever had the bigger fist had the right to speak. Lu Jie only felt that it was a pity, but Ling Han was determined not to agree. Furthermore, he kept using, "I'm a member of the calm peace heaven," to brush him off, making him feel annoyed and annoyed. He couldn't be bothered to argue anymore. According to the original plan, he was going to pick 5 monarchs to form the 7-star brilliance moon formation with him and Lu Han. That way, they should just barely be able to resist that freak. After the candidates were chosen, the banquet continued, and the topic shifted to something other than martial art. Lu Han became more and more interested in Ling Han. There were very few female monarchs, and monarchs were all very arrogant. They wouldn't be willing to marry a man who was inferior to them. Thus, The choices they could make were actually very limited. Now that she had a good impression of Ling Han, Lu Han naturally found Ling Han pleasing to the eye. She even had the thought of becoming best friends with him. Of course, best friends and lovers were two different things, but for monarchs like her, lovers would definitely start as best friends. Fairy Lu Han, I heard that you once said that only by defeating you will I have the right to pursue you. Someone saw Lu Han and Ling Han whispering to each other and couldn't help but feel jealous. You said it yourself. If I don't defeat you, I won't even have the right to pursue you. Thus, if Ling Han wanted to pursue Lu Han, then no matter what, he would have to defeat Lu Han first, right? Lu Han revealed a displeased expression. Why was this person so talkative? In this world, the number of people who can defeat Fairy Lu at the same cultivation level can be counted on one hand. No wonder Fairy Lu is as beautiful as a celestial fairy, but has always remained unmarried. There were quite a lot of people who were jealous. Without waiting for Lu Han to express her opinion, they spoke up, wanting to separate Ling Han and Lu Han. Ling Han just smiled and drank his wine. He had spoken a little more to Lu Han just now, but because she was discussing celestial techniques with him, his interest was piqued. That was why he had spoken a little more to Lu Han. He didn't have any other thoughts at all. These people, can't their thoughts be a little more sunny? Lu Han's pretty face gradually darkened. Suddenly, she blinked her beautiful eyes, smiled sweetly and said, "Brother Ling, why don't you spar with me for a bit?" Ling Han rubbed his nose. It wasn't that he didn't respect Lu Han, but with his current strength, Lu Han probably didn't have the qualifications to spar with him. It was just a matter of how many moves she could take from him. "Ugly monster, let me spar with you." A voice suddenly rang out, and a young man walked out with large strides. He looked to be about 17 or 18 years old, and he was extremely handsome. Ling Han had seen many handsome men, but they couldn't even add up to 1/10 of this person. Furthermore, this young man's appearance was especially androgynous. If he changed into women's clothing, he would definitely be a stunning beauty, a super stunner that could charm all living things. Coincidentally, Ling Han had seen this person in women's clothing before. This wasn't some elegant young man, but rather Hun Yo in disguise. With the means of a celestial, hiding the Adam's apple and shrinking the size of the chest was obviously a small matter. If one deliberately concealed it, it would definitely be difficult to tell whether they were male or female. Unless one could probe one's body with origin power, then there would be no way to conceal their true body structure. Ugly monster. Hearing these words, at least half of the people looked furious. You actually dared to call Lu Han an ugly monster. Don't you know that she had the title of the second most beautiful woman in the wide prosperity heaven? Only the Black Flame Sect's holy daughter, Shu Yaring, could surpass her. If Lu Han was ugly, then would there still be any beautiful people in this world? But then there was Hun Yo. This young man was really extremely handsome. Though men and women couldn't be compared together, Hun Yo and Lu Han, everyone could come to the same conclusion, and that was that Hun Yo was far more handsome than Lu Han. Meanwhile, Lu Han raised her eyebrows in anger. She was actually called ugly monster in front of Ling Han, causing her to clench her fists in anger. But when she saw Hun Yo's appearance clearly, her heart couldn't help but beat wildly, faintly feeling a little confused. Hun Yo and the Empress were both stunning beauties that could turn the world upside down, and when they changed their appearance, they would change again with a shake of their bodies, able to make women lose control of their emotions. Lu Han's anger instantly vanished like smoke in thin air. She felt her heart beat wildly, and she could even feel her cheeks burning red. She had never believed in love at first sight, and even more so did not think that she would be that kind of infatuated fool that would actually be attracted by a man's appearance. But when it came to Hun Yo, her heart couldn't stop beating. Towards Ling Han, she only had some admiration, but towards this young man, she really loved him to death. "All right, let's have a spar." She nodded and floated out. Hun Yo glared fiercely at this ugly monster. She actually dared to seduce her Ling Han. She was definitely going to beat her up, so that she would never be able to seduce Ling Han again. Shio, the two of them leaped into the air, and stood 300 meters apart. The more Lu Han spoke, the more Tigress Nyo's delicate body softened. This young man wasn't the mighty type, but he was too handsome. His eyes were even more lively, as if they could speak, causing her heart to palpitate continuously. She made up her mind that no matter how strong Hunyo was, she definitely had to let her win. She naturally had to abide by her own words, but no one had said that she couldn't go easy, right? However, the moment Hunyo moved, her expression changed in shock. So strong. This wasn't some king tier or emperor tier, but rather a monarch tier. Not to mention that she was incredibly shocked, the others were also completely dumbfounded. Monarch tiers, they were like lone stars in the 9 heavens, pitifully few in number. But now, first there was a Ling Han, and then there was this young man. It was as if they had been knocked over. How could such a thing happen? Monarch tiers were worthless now? Though the fortune of the heaven and earth of the wide prosperity heaven had changed, and geniuses had appeared in the last 100 million years, it shouldn't have been so exaggerated, right? Lu Han hurriedly used her full strength to battle with Hunyo, but immediately became flustered, and fell into an absolute disadvantage. No one thought that Lu Han was going easy. Hunyo was too strong. A pair of rock wings spread out behind her, and she was even faster than lightning. Her arms were entwined with large fish markings, and there was even a single horn on her head. She was clearly a fish, yet she gave off a feeling that was even more noble than a divine dragon. Source Beast Rock, someone exclaimed in shock. No wonder this young man was unbelievably strong. He actually had the bloodline of a king-tier source beast, the rock, or had learned the rock's celestial king technique. It was said that king-tier source beasts were at least in the 8th heaven, and those that were nature-defying could even reach the 9th heaven, overlooking the whole celestial realm. Hunyo was in high spirits, and with a battle cry, the image of a large fish appeared behind her. However, it had a pair of rock wings, and an ancient and desolate aura circulated around her. She was like a celestial from ancient times, able to suppress the ages and connect the long river of time. Pung, with just that one tremble, Lu Han was sent flying. Her beautiful face was pale, and even her hair was slightly disheveled. A monarch tier had been defeated so easily. Chapter 1954. Lu Han endured the boiling in her chest and said, "I lost." She accepted it wholeheartedly. Hunyo was proud and said, "Ugly, you think you're mine, so you can't go and seduce other men, understand?" She suddenly realized that just beating the other up was useless. The so-called resurrection was completely not enough insurance. However, if she tied herself to someone who didn't exist, then she wouldn't have to worry about this ugly person seducing Ling Han again. She was really smart. Lu Han's pretty face blushed. Was she declaring her sovereignty by saying that? She was already jealous and didn't want to have any contact with other men. Her jealousy was shocking, but it also made her feel incredibly cute, and her heart softened. Then she lowered her head, extremely obedient. Everyone was stunned. The second beauty of the wide prosperity heaven was seduced just like that? Ling Han didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't think that Hunyo not only didn't listen to him and obediently stayed at home, but also disguised as a man and came to seduce girls. "How should I address you?" Lu Jie asked with a smile. He was actually shocked. Another monarch tier had appeared, but he didn't have the slightest bit of information beforehand, which made him incredibly shocked. Moreover, this young man's strength was frighteningly strong, defeating Lu Han in a few moves. This made him think of a few freaks in the wide prosperity heaven. Hunyo glared at him, put her hands on her hips, and said, "What, you want to hit on Nyo?" Everyone couldn't help but sweat. This appearance, this tone of voice, there was not the slightest bit of manliness. She was clearly a mischievous young girl. Lu Jie couldn't help but frown and said, "Lady, are you a man or a woman? What does that have to do with you?" Hunyo glared at Lu Jie fiercely. "I'm warning you, don't have any improper thoughts." Lu Jie's frown deepened and he said, "Since you are a woman, why make such a joke?" "Brother, what nonsense are you saying?" Lu Han immediately rebuked, her face full of anger. How could he be a woman? Everyone's jaws dropped. Were you blind? This was clearly a woman, and you were still so passionately in love. Sister, wake up. How does she look like a man? Lu Jie said anxiously. Lu Han glanced at Hun Yo, and felt that her husband was so handsome that it made people's hearts beat faster. Although he was slightly feminine, he was androgynous, so how did he become a woman? That's because your eyesight is too thin. Which one is 1/10 as handsome as this charming gentleman? Hun Yo was even more proud and said, Little girl, you're mine from now on. Ling Han shook his head and said, Hun Yo, don't mess around. Hun Yo did not even look at him and shouted, Who is Hun Yo? Who is Hun Yo? Don't talk nonsense. Everyone almost fainted. Just now, you called yourself Nyo, so and so, but there was a 99% chance that this Hun Yo was your name. This denial was too obvious. Good girl, Ling Han said softly. He had always habitually thought of Hun Yo as a little foodie who only knew how to cause trouble. This time, however, Hun Yo made up her mind. As long as there was a threat when she came, she would seize the initiative to seduce them away. This way, her Ling Han would be safe. As expected of Nyo, she was too smart. She did not pay any attention, and only waved at Lu Han, causing this beauty who had always been called a fairy to walk over shyly. They stood side by side. One was so handsome that she had no friends, while the other was as beautiful as a flower. Just this, they looked like a perfect couple. Brother Ling, is this your friend? Lu Jie asked Ling Han. Ling Han rubbed his nose and nodded. He was also speechless towards Hun Yo. Brother Ling, then I'll have to ask you to deal with this matter. Lu Jie was very good at shirking responsibility and directly handed it over to Ling Han to deal with. The banquet continued, but everyone's minds were not on the proper business. They were only focused on Hun Yo and Lu Han. One looked impatient and was cold and indifferent, while the other looked shy and her eyes were tender. One could tell that she was deeply in love. This love at first sight could really kill. Brother Ling, that's sister-in-law who... Mo Shuang came over, a gossipy expression on his face. Ling Han glanced at him, but did not say anything. Then what about me? He asked with a bitter expression. Just then, Ling Han had said that he would help him pick up girls, and in the end, it was his own woman who had picked him up. What was going on? Let's do nothing, Ling Han said. Since Hun Yo was stubborn, there was nothing he could do. However, today's harvest is very great. Mo Shuang became excited again. After all, Lu Han only represented a dream, and he also knew that it was impossible for him to be with her. Thus, he was not too disappointed. How much did we earn in total? Ling Han's eyes also lit up. Just star stones alone are about 7 million, and there is also a great deal of pseudo-divine metal and alchemical pills. The total value is over 20 million, Mo Shuang said in a low voice. Honestly speaking, 20 million star stones was not a lot for an ascending origin tier force, but 2 measly severing mundane tiers could earn so much in a short day. This was a very shocking number. Even if Mo Shuang could be considered a person who had seen the world, he was also extremely excited now. Ling Han nodded and said, We'll each take half. How can that do? Mo Shuang hurriedly shook his head and said, Big brother Ling, are you mocking me? I practically did not do anything, and it was all because of Big Brother Ling's astonishing alchemy prowess that we earned this fortune. I'll take 3 at most. All right. Ling Han did not stand on ceremony either. However, Mo Shuang was not as useless as he said. If it were not for the fact that he was the 7th son of the Mo clan, who would dare to make a bet with Ling Han? Thus, taking 3 was not really a lot. After the banquet ended, Ling Han was urged by Director Chen and Ma Yong to go see Zhu Feng. They used the transfer formation to cross an immeasurable distance, and arrived at the foot of a towering mountain. They saw that the green mountains were like a painting, surrounded by green water, and the scenery was astonishingly beautiful. They walked up the mountain path, and very soon, a large manor appeared in front of them. Ling Han immediately exclaimed in surprise because the layout of this manor was too similar to alchemist Zi Cheng's residence. After entering, this feeling became stronger and stronger. Even without Ma Yong and Qin Yong leading the way, Ling Han could still successfully find the alchemy room, main hall, left and right gardens, medicinal garden, and so on. It seemed that this third senior brother had still not been able to walk out of Grandmaster Zi Cheng's shadow. Even a detail like his residence was greatly affected. Of course, it could also be said that Zhu Feng was nostalgic and could not forget every bit of time he had spent by Grandmaster Zi Cheng's side. Not long after, the three of them arrived at the main hall. They saw that there was a middle-aged man sitting on the main seat. He had thick brows and large eyes, but his head was full of fluttering white hair, and he appeared a little out of place. "Little junior brother." This middle-aged man immediately laughed loudly when he saw Ling Han. With a single glance, Ling Han could confirm that this was Zhu Feng, and not some impostor. A true grandmaster of alchemy would naturally have an indescribable aura. The higher one's skill in alchemy, the more clearly they could sense it. He was also full of smiles, and strode forward to receive him, saying, "Third senior brother." When he neared, he clasped his hands heavily and said, "Ling Han pays his respects to third senior brother. No need to be so courteous." Before Ling Han could kneel, Zhu Feng had already grabbed him. "Previously, I received a message from Master, saying that the three of us have gained a little junior brother. I was still wondering what this little junior brother looked like, and I have finally met him today." He turned around and shouted, "Zijun, hurry up and kneel down, and apologize to your martial granduncle." Chapter 1956. Ling Han merely glanced at him, and didn't say anything. This was his way of expressing his disdain, and he couldn't be bothered to respond. That person was instantly infuriated, and he raised his voice as he said sarcastically, "I am Lu Xing, the 9th disciple of Grandmaster Shao Lixing. I pay my respects to fourth uncle." "Fourth uncle, you wouldn't be so arrogant as to ignore your own junior, right?" Shao Lixing was the second disciple of Grandmaster Zi Cheng, and he had left for the distant Shiyun Sky. Now, he was a renowned alchemy grandmaster in Shiyun Sky, and he had been recruited by the return to Origin Palace. Thus, this Lu Xing could naturally be considered Ling Han's nephew. The three disciples of Grandmaster Zi Cheng had always been close, and their disciples often interacted with each other. Because Lu Xing was about the same age as Zhu Zijuan and had similar habits, the two of them became close friends. They didn't drift apart because of their seniority. This time, Lu Xing had come with Shao Lixing to congratulate Zhu Feng, but he had been delayed by some matters along the way, and had only just arrived this morning. He had initially wanted to immediately catch up with Zhu Zijuan, chat about life, and flirt with girls. However, he found out that Zhu Zijuan had already left Guanhua City. He was astonished. Even if he wanted to leave, he would have to wait until Zhu Feng's celebration was over, right? Only later did Lu Xing find out that Zhu Zijuan hadn't left of his own accord. Rather, he had been forced to leave, and the main culprit was Ling Han's junior uncle who had suddenly appeared. What the hell? A brat wants to become my junior uncle? Lu Xing was a prodigy of alchemy. Thus, even though he was young, he was referred to as junior uncle, senior granduncle, or even grand senior granduncle by countless old alchemists. This was something that he had always been proud of. Who would have thought that he would actually have to refer to someone even younger than him as junior uncle one day? Firstly, he was displeased, and secondly, he was feeling indignant on behalf of his good friend. Thus, Lu Xing specially came to stop Ling Han. As a junior, he naturally didn't dare to order Ling Han around. However, he naturally had his own ways to humiliate him. Only now did Ling Han glance at Lu Xing and say, "You may dispense with the formalities." "Fuck, I didn't even pay my respects to you." Lu Xing's eye hissed in his mind. No wonder Zhu Zijuan had been forced to leave. Just look, this person's mouth is so venomous, and his heart is definitely rotten to the core. Fourth martial uncle really is young and promising. From your appearance, you shouldn't be over 100,000 years old, right? A fake smile appeared on his face as he deliberately flattered Ling Han. The higher you lift it, the harder you fall. According to normal calculations, Ling Han would only be over 200 years old, and comprehending Tao under the reincarnation tree would not increase the age of his physical body. However, after entering the time cultivation chamber, the Black Tower could also speed up his time by 1,000 times. Right now, his actual age had already passed 10,000 years. This was reflected in the flame of life. Even though it burned fiercely, incomparably vigorous, one could still see the traces left behind by the passage of time. Of course, 10,000 years in the immortal realms was actually not much different from the blink of an eye. The age of experts could easily be counted in tens of billions or even hundreds of billions. Hey, is your smile real or fake? Don't ever smile again, or Nyo will beat you to a pulp. Hunyo glared at him. She had always maintained a pure and innocent heart, and was as pure as a child's, apart from the fact that she wanted to have children with Ling Han. Thus, if she was not used to it, she would directly speak her mind. She would not beat around the bush, nor would she feign civility. Lu Xingzai couldn't help but feel suffocated. Hunyo's aura was too powerful, and a single look from her was enough to make his hair stand on end. He almost wet his pants. He was a prodigy of alchemy, but he was not very talented in martial art. He wasn't even a king tier, so how could he possibly resist Hunyo's aura? He regained his composure and deliberately raised his voice as he said, "This junior has admired fourth martial uncle for a long time and would like to ask fourth martial uncle for guidance on some difficult alchemy problems." At first, they had been whispering in a corner, and no one else had noticed them. However, things were different now that he had called out to them. They instantly attracted the attention of many people. Zhu Feng was a 4-star alchemist. Although the holy land of alchemy in the Eastern Celestial Realm was in Alchemy City, this did not mean that there were no alchemists in other places. On the contrary, there were alchemists in every place. However, 99% of them belonged to Alchemy City, and only a very small number of them worked alone. For example, Zhu Feng lived in Guanhua City. Firstly, he could receive the protection of the Common Cloud Celestial King, and secondly, it was relatively easier for him to obtain celestial medicines in a Celestial King tier force. Thus, this kind of celebration was actually more attractive to alchemists. For alchemists, advancing from the 5th refinement to the 6th refinement was a glorious achievement that was worthy of worship. Who was Lu Xing? A lot of people recognized him. He was Xiao Lixing's favorite disciple. Although he had only stepped onto the path of alchemy for a few years, he was already a 2-star alchemist, and had even reached the 3rd refinement in spirit refinement. In the future, he definitely had a chance of becoming a grandmaster alchemist. Even Lu Xing had to call him martial uncle, so wouldn't that mean that he was a 4-star alchemist? They hurried to pay their respects to this great god. But when everyone's eyes swept over them, they did not discover anyone that looked like a grandmaster. Aside from Lu Xing, there was a young man and 4 young women, and aside from being handsome and beautiful, none of these 5 people looked like a 4-star alchemist. However, those women were really beautiful and could melt anyone's heart. The person that Lu Xing was referring to was that young man. Hiss, this guy was actually Lu Xing's martial uncle? Was that possible? Ling Han looked at the other, and he only needed to see a shred of disdain in the other's eyes to know that the other was only asking for guidance, and his real intention was to embarrass him. As a junior, of course, he could ask for guidance from a senior, but that also depended on the occasion. Furthermore, it was not something that one could ask for guidance just because one wanted to. Whether one could teach or not was in the hands of the senior. However, Lu Xing had intentionally shouted at this moment. Under the gazes of the crowd, if Ling Han refused, it would inevitably give others a terrible impression. Even though it was just a small detail, it fully displayed Lu Xing's viciousness. 4th martial uncle, it can't be that you have stage fright, right? Lu Xing asked again, landing another stone on Ling Han, leaving him with no way out. He felt smug in his heart. You dare to bully my brother, so how am I going to deal with you? Furthermore, he had always been well-behaved, so who could find any fault with him? Ling Han smiled calmly and said, "Teaching and dispelling the doubts of a junior is also the responsibility of a senior. If there is anything you don't understand, ask away. Little guy, do you think that you can stumble me just because I am a 2-star alchemist and have reached the 3rd refinement?" On the contrary, he had the reincarnation tree and was incredibly rich in theoretical knowledge. What he lacked was actual combat experience. The smile at the corners of Lu Xing's lips became wider and wider, and he said, "Recently, I have been concocting the 4 symbols bone-forming pill, and have some doubts about the proportion of supplementary ingredients and the details of usage. I hope that 4th martial uncle can answer me." When everyone heard this, they all shook their heads inwardly. There were countless alchemical pills in this world, and even a 4-star alchemist would not really know how to concoct too many alchemical pills, because the time needed to fully understand a pill recipe was really too long. Ling Han was so young, and it was possible that he had not even reached the level of a 2-star alchemist, but Lu Xing actually asked him for guidance on the concoction of a 3-star alchemical pill. Was this not deliberately making things difficult for him? Furthermore, the proportion was fine. As long as one had seen the pill recipe, there would be no problem. The memory of a celestial was naturally trustworthy, but to explain the details of usage of each supplementary ingredient was difficult. If one did not fully understand the pill recipe, how could one explain it? Chapter 1957. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Ling Han. How would he answer? Not surprisingly, this young man's face would turn red and he would leave in shame and anger. Ling Han's face didn't change, but he thought it was a coincidence. Because recently, he had also started to study 3 kinds of pills, one of which was the 4 elephants bone-melting pill. "You've delivered yourself to me." Ling Han purposely pondered for a while, as if he was thinking hard. "4th uncle, don't tell me you don't even know what the 4 elephants bone-melting pill is?" Lu Xing took the chance to give a fatal blow. "Get out of here with your tail between your legs." Ling Han smiled faintly and found a place to sit down. He said, "Shouldn't you serve tea before asking for advice from your elders? TSK, you even put on a show." Lu Xing sneered in his heart. In his opinion, it was Ling Han who was making things difficult for him. Ling Han's intention was to get rid of his current predicament. This was called attacking instead of defending. "What a pity, you've already fallen into my trap. How could I let you jump out of it?" Of course. His face was full of respect. He asked the servants in the hall to pour some good tea, then he walked over and offered it to Ling Han. "My performance is impeccable. I won't give you any chance to find fault with me." There were more and more people around. Some were just here for the fun, while others were curious about Ling Han. They wanted to know whether he was the real deal. After all, he was Xiao Lixing's junior brother, so he couldn't be underestimated. Ling Han sat up straight and crossed his legs. Then he stretched out his right hand. A few veins popped out on Lu Xing's forehead, but he gritted his teeth, bent down and put the teacup in Ling Han's hand. "I'll let you be proud now. How will you cry later?" Ling Han held the teacup, blew on it and slowly tasted it. He was not just making fun of Luda by putting on airs like this. He was still thinking about the refining method of the 4 elephants bone-melting pill in his mind. This was a buffer process. After all, he was only learning to concoct this kind of pill. He had an amazing understanding of it, but he lacked actual combat experience. There were some details that he could only understand after concocting it himself. He was the Alchemy Emperor. With just a few moves, he already had a well-thought-out plan. However, he still sipped his tea leisurely, so leisurely that it made people want to punch him. Others might not know, but Lu Xing must have been driven mad. Ling Han was teasing Lu Xing on purpose, making him bow and serve him like a little wife. Putting aside the fact that the veins on Lu Xing's forehead were bulging, even the spectators in the surroundings were growing impatient. "You're just drinking tea, so is there a need for you to blow on it 10 times after taking a sip? Will you be scalded if you blow a few times less? You're a severing mundane ancestor. Getting scalded while drinking tea, isn't that a joke? I endure. Lu Xing kept saying inside, "As long as I can endure this period, I, Ling Han, will become a joke." However, he had never imagined that Ling Han's counterattack would be so incisive, making him act like a coward in public. How humiliating. But it had already come to this, so he naturally could not give up. He could only grit his teeth and persevere. Finally, Ling Han finished his tea. Lu Xing breathed a sigh of relief. Everyone else also breathed a sigh of relief. "You're really too good at whetting our appetite." Ling Han handed the teacup to Lu Xing. Lu Xing naturally immediately accepted it and said, "Fourth uncle, my back is a little tight. Help me massage it." Lu Xing already wanted to kill someone very much. Sparks were about to shoot out of his eyes. He gritted his teeth tightly and continuously comforted himself. He could not let all his previous efforts go to waste. Otherwise, he would really have been a coward for half a day for nothing. He circled around to the back of Ling Han and pa. He began to knock on Ling Han's back. The Empress, Hun Yo, and the other women all smiled. He actually dared to play mind games with Ling Han. Did he not know that this guy had been trained by the large black dog? Lu Xing was really a little regretful now. He had not managed to mess with Ling Han, yet he had already been toyed with enough. He was really worried whether his heart could continue to bear it. But it had already come to this, so how could he be willing to give up halfway? He merely suppressed the fury in his heart even more fiercely, looking forward to Ling Han's embarrassing look in every possible way. This also became the motivation for him to endure the gazes of others and continue. Just continue being arrogant. After Lu Xing hammered for a long time, he forcibly suppressed his fury and said, "Fourth uncle, are you satisfied?" Ling Han said unhurriedly. "There's no need," Ling Han said again. Lu Xing almost couldn't catch his breath. "If you don't need it, then don't need it. Why did you have to specifically say that? Are you trying to scare me to death?" Fourth uncle, can you explain to this junior now?" he asked humbly, but in truth he was gritting his teeth. Ling Han coughed and said, "I seem to be a little thirsty again." Lu Xing's face twitched involuntarily. His fist was already itching to deliver a punch at Ling Han's face. Why was it that this face was so displeasing to the eye? "Forget it, you've worked hard," Ling Han said again. Only then did Lu Xing not explode. If Ling Han really said he wanted another cup, he would definitely jump up. "All right, then let's talk about the concoction of the 4 symbols bone-forming pill." Ling Han smiled, no longer teasing Lu Xing. In his eyes, this was only a small game before the celebration to pass the time. His expression became serious, and he began to explain. In the beginning, everyone was smiling, treating this as a show of fun. However, as they listened, their expressions also became serious. Ling Han explained the process of concocting the 4 symbols bone-forming pill in an extremely profound manner, causing everyone to repeatedly nod their heads as they listened. They felt that if they were the ones to learn, they would also be able to concoct the 4 symbols bone-forming pill immediately. Even Lu Xing couldn't help but feel excited. Although he had purposely used this question to make things difficult for Ling Han, he did have many questions himself. However, after hearing Ling Han's explanation, he suddenly understood. As he spoke, everyone's expression became even more serious, because the scope of Ling Han's explanation had gone beyond the scope of the 4 symbols bone-forming pill, and it had spread to other fields. He was explaining the entire Tao of alchemy. There was no doubt that Ling Han was not a master in the Tao of alchemy. At best, he was just a small fish. However, when he was learning spiritual refinement, he integrated his own understanding into it and walked his own path. Although he was very immature, his foundation was more solid than anyone else's. Now, he was explaining the most basic of things. Everyone knew the basics, but not many could understand them in depth. Come, there's a master explaining alchemy. Brother Fan, come, or you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Lin Qian, hurry up and call your fellow apprentices over. The surrounding alchemists all took out their communication stones and began calling their friends. For alchemists, this was an event that they absolutely could not miss. It was an opportunity for them to greatly improve their alchemy abilities. Because for the majority of alchemists, they actually did not need too deep a knowledge of alchemy. If they could build a solid foundation, their improvement would be even greater. Thus, even more people rushed over and gathered here. This small place was so crowded that not even a drop of water could leak through. Chapter 1958. Some people did not understand the situation, and when they walked here, they could not help but be stunned. What was going on? Why were there so many people? Those in the field of martial art naturally had no interest in alchemy. They would not understand even if they heard, and would immediately turn around and leave, but alchemists were different. They were immediately attracted by Ling Han's explanation, and involuntarily sat down cross-legged, listening carefully. It was very strange. There were obviously so many people, but the scene was completely silent. Aside from Ling Han's explanation, no one else made a sound. They all looked at Ling Han with reverence and fanaticism in their eyes, as if they were worshipping a god. From a certain perspective, Ling Han was indeed the god of alchemy. It was only when the ceremony was about to officially begin that Ling Han stopped his lecture. Only then did everyone stand up, feeling as if they had not had enough. No matter who it was, they all bowed to Ling Han. Even 3-star alchemists were no exception. In terms of mastery of the basics, Ling Han's understanding even surpassed that of the majority of 3-star alchemists, so 3-star alchemists also benefited greatly and involuntarily gave Ling Han the highest treatment. They firmly believed that Ling Han would definitely become a grandmaster in the future and might even create history, reconnect the gap in alchemy in the Eastern Celestial Realm, and become a new 5-star alchemist 100 billion years later. Just thinking about it caused their scalps to go numb. Perhaps today's scene would also be forever engraved in history, representing Ling Han's rise in the celestial realm. Lu Xing was dumbfounded. He had come to humiliate Ling Han, but in the end he was adding glory to Ling Han instead. To what extent has Ling Han's popularity reached? He was stupid, so stupid that he had actually taken the initiative to elevate Ling Han to the position of God, causing him to be so depressed that his mouth was about to become crooked. Just at this moment he felt a weight on his shoulder, and saw a large hand press down on his shoulder. Be a down-to-earth person, put more effort into alchemy, cultivate your heart, and be a bit more open-minded, Ling Han said. This was indeed his advice. He was not a petty person. Lu Xing was so young, yet he had already begun to break through to become a 3-star alchemist. This kind of achievement was worthy of recognition. Thus, he advised Lu Xing otherwise, he could not be bothered to waste his breath on him, and would just directly beat him to death. Lu Xing blushed, not daring to look at Ling Han in the eye. Ling Han patted Lu Xing's shoulder lightly again. Then he strode away, ignoring him. Master Ling! Master Ling! After Ling Han walked past, the alchemists at the side all started to greet him with sincere smiles on their faces. Though Ling Han was still very far away from becoming a grandmaster, merely based on Ling Han's previous explanations, everyone felt a strong sense of respect for him. This was a selfless person, and he had shared his experiences in alchemy with them, which had greatly benefited everyone. Zhu Feng's 2 senior brothers also came in person to congratulate him. Both of them were radiant, and they pulled Ling Han aside to exchange pleasantries, mainly asking about Grandmaster Zi Cheng's recent situation. Of Ling Han's 3 senior brothers, the older they were, the worse their achievements in alchemy. For example, though eldest senior brother and second senior brother were both 4-star alchemists, they had only reached the 5th refinement in spirit refinement, and had just stepped into the ranks of grandmasters. It should be impossible for eldest senior brother Zhang Ning to step into the 6th refinement, while second senior brother Xiao Lixing still had a sliver of possibility. Instead, it was third senior brother Zhu Feng who had taken this step forward, advancing into the 6th refinement. Ling Han spoke for a long time with his 3 senior brothers. Zhang Ning and Xiao Lixing earnestly invited Ling Han to come over as a guest, and Ling Han agreed first. As for when he would go, he would ask for it. He was also a busy man. The celebration continued for a total of 5 days. After it ended, Ling Han hurriedly set out on his journey again, rushing towards the 3 Flowers Valley. Strictly speaking, the 3 Flowers Valley was in the territory of the Calm Peace Heaven, but as long as there was territory, there would naturally be disputes over territory, and the 3 Flowers Valley was at the border of the Calm Peace Heaven. Thus, it was naturally a very normal thing for there to be disputes over territory. Otherwise, the Celestial King of the Wide Prosperity Heaven would not have, accidentally, discovered the 3 Flowers Valley and the fiery flame lightning strike wood. Ling Han's group set out, and Bewitching Maiden Rose still shamelessly followed, causing Hunyo to glare repeatedly. How could there be such a shameless person? If it was not for the Empress holding her back, she really wanted to beat the other party's face into a pig's head, and then throw her as far away as she could. Under Hunyo's endless disdain, the group passed through thousands of mountains and rivers, and spent close to 3 months' time before they finally walked out of the wide prosperity heaven, and once again returned to the calm peace heaven. Then, they continued heading west, and another month later, they finally arrived at the Three Flowers Valley. Was this really a valley? Ling Han gazed at the rolling clouds and fog in front of him. This valley was as large as a sea, with no end in sight at all, and the clouds and fog were like the waves of the sea, slightly surging, incredibly magnificent. It could be seen that in this kind of sea, there were 3 mountain peaks that suddenly rose up, looking very much like 3 blooming flowers. This was also the origin of the Three Flowers Valley's name. Boom, a wave of water surged over from afar. That was a gust of wind that wrapped around the clouds, forming a kind of special scenery. However, the expressions of Ling Han and the others all changed involuntarily. This gust of wind was too frightening. There were multiple patterns of great Tao throbbing, and every one of them was supreme, easily able to shatter the 9 heavens. Celestial King tier patterns, they all exclaimed in shock. No wonder the eternal prosperity Celestial King had said that even Celestial Kings could not force the fateful encounters here. A random gust of wind here was a violent attack on the level of a Celestial King. Ascending origin tiers would die instantly upon encountering it, and if it was a Celestial King, it was unknown how many heavens this gust of wind was equivalent to. In short, in front of the might of heaven and earth, only 9th heaven Celestial Kings could smile proudly, look down on everything, and be on equal footing with the Tao of heaven and earth. They tried to enter the valley, but from time to time, patterns of great Tao would flash through the clouds. Their might could obliterate everything, so they did not dare act rashly at all. Right now, no one could enter the valley. Celestial Kings should be able to, but they definitely would not be able to enter deep. The will of heaven and earth was above everything. It was said that entering the valley was also particular. One could not just randomly find a place and jump down. There was the regulation of gravity here, and it was incredibly frightening. Furthermore, the rocks at the bottom of the valley were like spears, and were imbued with patterns of great Tao. If he was pierced through, then even with Ling Han's physique, he would not be able to bear it, and it was guaranteed that he would die immediately. Thus, they had to find the correct entrance and keep going all the way down to reach the valley. Then, they could talk about finding the fiery flame lightning-struck wood. Ling Han and his group walked for a few days before finally finding the entrance. At this time, there were already a considerable number of people here. Ling Han recognized some, and there were some he did not. Brother Ling, Yan Xianlu and Lu Jie walked over at the same time. When they discovered that the other party was calling out to Ling Han, they couldn't help but be startled, and walked towards each other. What was going on? Why was the other party also greeting Ling Han? Ling Han, meanwhile, smiled and said, "Brother Yan, Brother Lu." "Brother Ling, how do you know him?" Yan Xianlu and Lu Jie asked almost at the same time. Ling Han smiled and said, "I made a trip to Guanhua City, and then I got to know Brother Lu." "What? You are really a member of the Calm Peace Heaven." With these words, Lu Jie naturally understood. He immediately recalled that Ling Han had repeatedly said that he was a member of the Calm Peace Heaven. At that time, no one had believed him. Even he had thought that Ling Han was deliberately making excuses. At that time, he had even grumbled, but he had not thought that it was actually true. Hiss. Chapter 1960. Xiao. 2 figures leaped out from the blazing light, fighting fiercely as they did so. Every time they clashed, it would cause the great Tao to tremble. Clouds and mist rose, and there were thousands of scenes. "Ha, how delightful, how delightful." Shi Xiuwen laughed madly, his braids dancing in the wind. His muscles bulged, and ancient symbols appeared one after another. That was the might of his immortal core, and it supported him with boundless power. It was as if he could split open the heavens and split the earth. He was from the Golden Giant tribe. At the beginning of the world, numerous source beasts were born. At the same time, There were numerous humanoid beings, such as bronze giants, golden giants, and lightning giants. These beings were naturally celestial king tier level, but after a long period of time, some were still alive, some had died in battle, and some had gone missing. For example, the golden giant tribe. The ancestor of this tribe had gone missing, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive. It was as if he had completely vanished from this world. However, this did not affect the strength of his descendants. Once their bloodline reverted to ancestry, they would become divine fetus and be able to use the super ability of the golden giant, possessing boundless strength and astonishing defensive abilities. Shi Xiuwen roared loudly, activating his ancient ability, raising his battle prowess to the limit. Fight, 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 fight. Hunyo was also angered. The image of the rock continued to transform, actually turning from illusion to reality. There really was a massive rock that appeared, and with a flap of its wings, it shocked the past and present. For a moment, the two of them were locked in battle. What? Seeing such an intense battle, whether it was the cultivators of the wide prosperity heaven or the calm peace heaven, they all wore expressions of shock and disbelief. The people of the wide prosperity heaven did not dare to believe it. That was because they were too confident, thinking that any monarch tier they sent out would be able to defeat the severing mundane tier of the calm peace heaven, but now there was actually a young girl that could be locked in battle with Shi Xiuwen. This naturally shocked them. It should be known that though Shi Xiuwen was ranked 9th, from 10th to 4th, everyone's strength was very close. In fact, it was possible that Shi Xiuwen was stronger than the 4th. That was because in the ranking battles, Shi Xiuwen had lost to that heaven-defying freak who had later obtained first place and was heavily injured. That was why he had suffered consecutive defeats in the following battles, finally falling to 9th place. However, Shi Xiuwen was still not ranked 10th, which showed how powerful he was. Meanwhile, those on the side of the calm peace heaven were also in disbelief. That was because many of them had heard that Hunyo had once defeated Yan Xianlu, Shan Jitong, and Lao Song, and was definitely the strongest severing mundane tier in the calm peace heaven, yet she was actually unable to suppress the 9th in the wide prosperity heaven. However, after exchanging over 1,000 blows, the gap between the two became apparent. Tigress has the upper hand. Her hands transformed into tiger claws that were imprinted with the Kuan Ping imprint. Her destructive power was incomparably terrifying. Even though Shi Xiuwen's golden giant immortal fetus possessed extremely powerful defensive abilities, his skin was still lacerated by her sharp claws. What was shocking was that the blood Shi Xiuwen splashed out was also golden in color, as if it was liquid metal. It solidified as soon as it landed on the ground. Some of it was even picked up by someone, discovering with shock that this was actually half immortal gold. This race was astonishing after all, their blood flowing with half immortal gold liquid. One could see just how terrifying their physiques were. However, what was even more terrifying was Hunyo. She actually managed to tear apart such a physique with her bare hands. Just how astonishing was this little girl's destructive power? Ah, you are the first woman that can wound me. Shi Xiuwen laughed loudly. He did not lose his composure or his fighting spirit because he was wounded or at a disadvantage in the slightest. Instead, his fighting spirit skyrocketed endlessly. So, I plan to make you my woman. His battle intent blazed, turning into a cloud of fire that made the golden giant appear even more mighty. There was a symbol on its chest that emitted a blazing light. It was as if it had turned into a sun, making it impossible for others to look at it directly. This was a true prodigy. When encountering a powerful opponent, not only would he not shrink back, but he would instead improve himself, breaking through his limits, and further improve his battle prowess that seemed impossible to improve. Hunyo also flew into a rage and said, "Nyo is Ling Han's. You wild monkey, you actually dare to have ideas about Nyo? Nyo will beat you to death." Hong. Her battle prowess also rose madly. Multiple patterns appeared on the large fish, and then, with a sudden sweep of her tail, she whipped out at Shi Xiuwen. The battle continued. Though Shi Xiuwen had broken through his own limits, Hunyo was also a little battle maniac and similarly could break through her limits. Thus, she was still suppressing Shi Xiuwen. However, though Shirshiowen looked like he was about to lose, who knew if he had any terrifying ultimate move that could turn the tables? Furthermore, from being at a disadvantage to being truly defeated, that was definitely not something that could happen in a short period of time. Ling Han nodded. No wonder Yen Xianlu was no match for Shirshiowen. In truth, it was already very extraordinary that Yen Xianlu could survive in Shirshiowen's hands. However, if one were to say that Yen Xianlu was inferior to Shirshiowen in terms of physique, battle talent, and celestial techniques, Ling Han would definitely not agree. Then the reason could only be as the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King's comment that Yen Xianlu had passed on. The wide prosperity heaven had received the blessing of the heaven and earth. Thus, the young prodigies of this generation were a notch stronger than the members of the calm peace heaven. With Shirshiowen's strength, even in the Western Celestial Realm, he would probably be able to rank in the top tier among severing mundane tiers, because Hunyeo was this kind of existence, and he was only slightly inferior. Shan Jitong and Lao Song both had their spirits stolen, and also felt an indescribable sense of loss. They were indeed slightly inferior to Yen Xianlu, but who did not know that Yen Xianlu had been born on the celestial path? Furthermore, he had an 8th heaven celestial king as his master, so if he was inferior, then so be it. This was also acceptable. Moreover, after advancing into the celestial king tier, the difference in physique would be smoothed out. They were confident that they could catch up and no longer be dominated by Yen Xianlu. But when it came to the battle between Hunyeo and Shirshiowen, their confidence collapsed. They were all monarch tiers, but this gap was so wide that it made one despair. Was the difference in physique really that obvious? Definitely not. Thus, even if they had all become celestial kings, they were still no match for Hunyeo and Shirshiowen. At most, they would only be able to exchange a few more moves. The fierce battle was still going on, and more monarch tiers had arrived. They were naturally all from the wide prosperity heaven, and when it came to the battle between Hunyeo and Shirshiowen, all of them showed expressions of caution. Shirshiowen was even stronger than he had been in the previous ranking battles, but this young girl was freakishly strong. Who was she? Where had she come from? After battling for 3 days, Shirshiowen was finally no match for Hunyeo, and left the battle ring. "You are indeed stronger than me," he declared loudly. He had not lost confidence because he had lost a battle. Instead, his spirit, energy, and mind had all been raised to peak condition. "In 100 years, I will find you for another battle. At that time, I will defeat you, and make you obediently become my woman." Saying this, he turned and left, not giving Hunyeo the chance to fly into a rage. Hunyeo was enraged, and was about to chase after him, yet was pulled back by Ling Han. He shook his head at her, and said, "The next time he appears, I will beat him into a pig's head, and make him not dare have any more wishful thinking." Hunyeo was instantly elated, and hooked her arm around Ling Han's, looking pure and innocent, so adorable that it made one's heart ache. Chapter 1961. Instantly, a great many gazes turned to stare at Ling Han, expressions of envy on their faces. This young man was really too lucky. Hunyeo was so powerful that she could even defeat Shirshiowen, and she herself was shockingly beautiful. What more could one ask for with such a perfect partner? Moreover, Hunyeo was so fierce to others, but she was as gentle as water to Ling Han. It couldn't be any more simple. Meanwhile, Lu Han's beautiful eyes were dark, and her gaze on Ling Han was filled with resentment. If it wasn't for this man, Hunyeo would be hers. As long as she consumed the heaven yang grass, gender wouldn't be a problem at all. It was this man who separated her and Hunyeo. He had to die. Old Ninth Shur is so useless, unable to even defeat a piece of trash from the calm peace heaven, a man who had arrived later said with a scoff. Seeing that the people of the calm peace heaven had all arrived, he proudly said, "I, Fei Yun, rank 6th among the severing mundane tier of the wide prosperity heaven." Rank 6th though Hunyeo won, it wasn't an easy victory, and Shirshiowen was only ranked 9th, so how powerful would the 6th be? Hunyeo bared her teeth, and was about to attack again. She could use a powerful move that could instantly destroy heaven and earth, but she could only use it once every many days. If she had no other choice, she definitely wouldn't use it. This was a true life-saving move. Ling Han reached out to stop her and said, "Let me." The Empress was also burning with fighting spirit, but seeing that Ling Han said he would attack, she restrained herself. "Is it up to you to decide whether I'm trash or not?" Ling Han strode out. "Huh, who in the calm-peace heaven isn't trash?" Fei Yun's expression was filled with disdain. "You guys can come at me together, and see how I suppress you." Arrogant, really too arrogant. Ling Han shook his head. What was there to waste words with a madman? Beat him up. Then come and fight. Whether you're trash or not, we'll talk with our fists. Trash, if you want to be beaten up, I'll grant your wish. Fei Yun's figure moved, and he already charged towards Ling Han. He didn't care that there were other people around him. He punched out violently. There was a blurry symbol of the great path on the surface of his fist, and it emitted a light that could shatter everything. Those who were not emperors immediately turned around and fled. Once they lost control of this fist energy, its destructive power would be too terrifying. Ling Han shook his head and drew a line with his finger. It was a simple action, but it seemed to be able to suppress the world. "How dare you underestimate me?" Fei Yun roared angrily. The great Tao symbol on his fist had become slightly clearer, and it was clear that its destructive power had increased. Ling Han smiled faintly and countered with a finger. Boom, the two of them clashed for the first time. Actually, their fingers and fists did not make direct contact. Instead, they were separated by at least 10 meters. The great path and origin power of both sides had already collided intensely. Then they came to a standstill. Waves of terrifying power and rules surged out and shot out in all directions. The emperors who had just run away were just dragged along by this force, and their bodies involuntarily swayed, as if they were drunk. They couldn't help but be shocked. It was only the difference between Emperor tier and Monarch tier, so how could there be such a huge gap in strength? This was natural. Ling Han and Fei Yun were both 5th severance, which was equivalent to Yang Soul elites. Their battle prowess had even soared to Yin Soul, so how could the aftermath of this kind of attack be something that a severing mundane tier could easily endure? The fact that they hadn't been directly shocked to death already meant that these people were strong enough. Otherwise, if they had been ordinary 4th severance, they would definitely have died directly. Ling Han withdrew his finger, and was incredibly calm and composed. "Is that all you are capable of? Damn it, you actually dare to underestimate me like this?" Fei Yun's black hair fluttered, and he was madly enraged. Ling Han shook his head. "You think too highly of yourself. Your strength is no match for Shishouwen's at all." Rankings could not truly explain the gap in strength. He knew in his heart from this punch that Fei Yun was no match for Shishouwen. Previously, it had already been said that Shishouwen was ranked 9th, and that was because he had encountered that freak who was ranked 1st in his first battle in the ranking tournament. In the end, he was defeated and heavily wounded, and in the end, he was only ranked 9th. Of course, this did not mean that Fei Yun was not strong. As a monarch tier, Fei Yun was naturally strong, and indeed could squeeze into the top 10 of the wide prosperity heaven. Compared to Shishouwen, there should only be a small gap, but could there be a small gap between top-notch prodigies? After I beat you into dregs, you will know how big the gap between us is. A black aura flowed out of Fei Yun's eyes, continuously rising and turning into a black scythe. Scythe of death! Someone exclaimed in shock, his expression changing. It should be known that he was an emperor tier. I really never thought that Fei Yun would use the scythe of death so quickly, a monarch tier side. Who asked that brat to anger Fei Yun? A monarch tier gloated. The relationship between monarch tiers was direct competition in the first place, and now that it was a battle between two great heaven regions, they naturally hoped that Fei Yun would kill Ling Han. Fei Yun charged out again, but he had not yet reached Ling Han when the massive scythe behind him had already slashed down. It was clearly an illusory image, yet it exuded a cold metallic light, as if it were tangible. Ling Han clenched his right hand into a fist and punched out at the air. Quang! It was like a sudden clap of thunder. Then wrinkles appeared in the space, and wave after wave was transmitted in all directions. The scythe of death was immediately affected, and its momentum was blocked. Then it appeared damaged, mottled, and then scattered. In the end, it turned into innumerable fragments that were blown away by the wind. Hiss! When they saw the might of this punch, everyone drew in a sharp breath. Even the monarch tears looked shocked. Fei Yun's terrifying attack was actually destroyed by a casual punch. Ling Han's strength was practically unfathomable. Yes, yes. Hu Niu immediately cheered, while the Empress applauded. The two women were definitely condescending and would do whatever they wanted. Just like now, no matter what, other women would be too embarrassed to cheer for their husband, right? And so they did. As expected, you cannot compare to Shi Xiuwen, Ling Han said with absolute certainty. Fei Yun clenched his hands into fists, so furious that the veins on his forehead were bulging. A prodigy like him would rarely get angry over anything, but he was extremely concerned about ranking. This was also one of the motivations for him to bury himself in cultivation, to be the strongest. But now, Ling Han actually erased his efforts, and actually thought that he was inferior to even Shi Xiuwen, who was ranked 9th. Didn't that mean that he could only be ranked 10th? How could he tolerate this? You are seeking your own death, he said darkly. With a shake of his right hand, a black scythe appeared, very similar to the scythe of death above his head. He channeled some kind of secret technique, and another shadow rose up, turning into a giant human figure that grasped the scythe of death. Slay the soul, he roared loudly and brandished the scythe in his hand. Above his head, the human figure also brandished the scythe of death. An indescribably strange wave attacked Ling Han. Ling Han was slightly surprised. As expected, it slay the soul. This attack is a pure attack of regulations, and can also completely ignore physical defenses, directly reaching the mind, and slay the soul. Unfortunately, this strength is too weak. Ling Han revealed an expression of disappointment. Although Fei Yun was only slightly weaker than Shi Xiuwen, it was this slight difference that caused him to completely lose his fighting spirit. Just trash. Chapter 1962. Ling Han let out a long roar and charged forward, completely ignoring the soul slash that the scythe of death had struck out with. You're courting death. Fei Yun sneered. The scythe of death arrived. Ling Han's clothes fluttered even though there was no wind, and it was the kind that moved greatly. A few of the corners of his clothes were directly torn. One had to know that the clothes he wore were not ordinary items, but were woven from celestial silk and subcelestial gold silk. Their defensive power was extremely shocking, but now a corner was torn. It was truly terrifying. But what was even more terrifying was Ling Han. He was unaffected as he charged over and punched towards Fei Yun's face. What? Fei Yun's mouth was wide open as he silently uttered these two words. His eyes were filled with intense disbelief. How could he block this attack so easily? But regardless of whether he accepted it or not, Ling Han's fist had already struck out. Humph! He waved the scythe to meet it, wanting to use his bare fist to block the celestial artifact. What a joke! This scythe was only a 4-star subcelestial artifact, but it had been sharpened by a celestial king and had a trace of the might of a celestial king. It was incomparably sharp and indirectly increased its battle prowess. Come on, if I don't cut off your fist, won't your hand be cheap? In Ling Han's eyes, he still maintained his punching posture and only circulated the Xianin source water. Peng, the scythe slashed over and chopped down on Ling Han's wrist, causing the collision of the Great Tao and the clash of the rules. There were countless symbols that shattered, but Ling Han's fist was still fine. He continued to punch straight towards Fei Yun. What a freak! Fei Yun was really shocked this time. Even after being sharpened by a celestial king, he still couldn't chop off Ling Han's wrist. Was his defense strengthened by a celestial king? Of course not. That was because the Xianin source water had shown its might. This was the source power of heaven and earth. Although it was limited by Ling Han's realm, could the power of a celestial king be fully unleashed on Fei Yun? Of course not. Furthermore, that was only a strand of power that had been added by a celestial king, but the Xianin source water was Ling Han's true source power. How could it compare? Thus, with both of them weakened, Ling Han naturally acted as if nothing had happened. Bama punch blasted out, smashing onto Fei Yun's body, sending him flying. Ling Han's figure dashed out, and with a single step, he caught up to Fei Yun. Another punch blasted out. Pung, Fei Yun's figure was instantly sent flying into the sky. Ling Han caught up with him and continued to beat him up. Fei Yun was indeed a top-notch sovereign. Even if he wasn't one, he should be close to it. He curled up into a ball and covered his face with his hands, guarding this area, which was also the most important area. This was enough to protect him from serious injuries. Ling Han had many ways to break through this layer of defense, such as the Nine Heavens Flame, the Xianyin Source Water, or the use of the 3 powers of regulation of the Black Tower, but against this kind of trash, was there a need to use these high-level methods? You want to be a turtle? He kicked out, and Peng, Fei Yun was instantly sent flying into the sky. Then, Ling Han drew out an iron spear. This was the wager that Emo Shuang had won for him, and he didn't know whose pseudo-celestial tool it belonged to. He used the power of space. His figure flashed and he passed through space. In a few moments, he had caught up to Fei Yun. Then he stabbed out with his spear, aiming straight for the latter's buttocks. No! Though Fei Yun was hugging his head, the divine sense of a celestial had spread out, so what difference was there from seeing it with his own eyes? This spear was going to burst his ass. His face was green. If he had his ass burst by an iron spear in front of so many people, would he still have the face to live in the future? But in order to protect his vitals, he had curled himself up tightly, so how could he easily change his path? He hurriedly stretched his body, wanting to use his movement technique. Even if he had to risk being shot in the thigh and lower abdomen, he couldn't let Lord Chrysanthemum suffer. But he had just stretched his body, and this spear had already arrived. Pooh! Suddenly, half of the spear directly sank into his buttocks. Who asked him to deliberately stretch his body, as if to welcome the entrance of the iron spear. Oh! He screamed, and his entire body was stretched into a straight line. Disgusting! Ling Han hurriedly swung his hand and threw Fei Yun out. Pung! Fei Yun fell from the sky and crashed heavily onto the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. He remained in a lying position, and a spear shaft was dangling from his buttocks. In fact, he hadn't fainted. This kind of attack wasn't enough to seriously injure him, but the key was that he had been humiliated, so he didn't dare to raise his head at all. A dignified monarch, and an existence ranked 6th in wide prosperity heaven at that, actually had his ass burst by someone in public. In an instant, everyone in wide prosperity heaven felt a common hatred for a common enemy, and they all glared at Ling Han with furious gazes. They felt that Ling Han had humiliated the entire wide prosperity heaven. Public enemy? Ling Han didn't care. Since he wanted to fight for the fiery flame lightning strike he would defeat all the prodigies. If they hated him, so be it. At most, he would just suppress them one by one. But hatred was hatred, and no one jumped out to challenge Ling Han. Fei Yun was a lesson to be learned. Why hasn't Lord Yi arrived yet? Where's Fairy Shu? Where's Tang Minglong? The prodigies of wide prosperity heaven all called out loudly, their emotions stirring. Yi was the existence ranked first among the severing mundane tier in wide prosperity heaven. No one knew if his surname was Yi, or if it was just a code name. This was a very mysterious person, but his strength was astonishingly powerful, and there was no dispute that he was ranked first. Shu Yareng was the #1 beauty of wide prosperity heaven, and at the same time, was ranked 2nd among the severing mundane tier, and Tang Minglong was ranked 3rd. The strength of these 3 people was clearly a level stronger than the other monarch tiers. Thus, the prodigies of wide prosperity heaven also firmly believed that as long as these 3 people arrived, any one of them would be able to suppress Ling Han. In such excitement, no one noticed that Fei Yun had secretly dug a hole and had already climbed in. Then he dug deeper and deeper, crawled further and further, and slipped away. Ling Han walked back to his original spot, and saw that Yan Xianlu and the others all looked excited. Brother Ling! Brother Ling! Lord Ling! Too awesome, viciously avenging the calm peace heaven. It should be known that from the start, the people of wide prosperity heaven had always been showing disdain, looking down on the calm peace heaven in every way. But now, they had been ruthlessly slapped in the face. Hadn't the 6th and 9th ranked monarch tiers still been smashed? Thankfully, Shi Xiuwen had run quickly, or his buttocks would also be smashed. One after another, everyone showing regret that they hadn't smashed Shi Xiuwen's buttocks, and this involuntarily caused Ling Han to sweat profusely. He wouldn't start a frenzy of smashing buttocks, right? This scene was too dirty and too violent, and he dared not imagine it. What a pity! Even Hu Niu showed an expression of pity. Such a fun thing, and Niu actually didn't think of it. Her eyes lit up, sweeping over the people of wide prosperity heaven, looking like she wanted to grab one to experiment. Not good, this girl was a curious baby, so he definitely couldn't let her learn such a dirty trick. Ling Han hurriedly pulled Hu Niu into his arms and changed the topic to food. Instantly, Hu Niu's mouth watered, and she successfully forgot that smashing buttocks was something that was completely unsuitable for girls. So close. On the 7th, I'm going to go on a trip at the tail end of the National Day and return on the 15th. During this period, I estimate that I'll update about 3 chapters every day. I've been busy for more than half a year, so let me relax for a few days. Recently, I've been renovating and preparing for my wedding, so it's been difficult for me to save chapters. It's more refreshing to read on my phone. Chapter 1964. Ji Wuming. Everyone looked at each other, and then they all shook their heads. This person really was nameless, no one had heard of him before. However, everyone immediately revealed expressions of anger. This person attacked them without distinguishing right from wrong. Furthermore, he provoked so many people with his own strength. Just how bold was he? What do you mean? One of the emperors asked patiently. The reason why Ji Wuming had asked instead of attacking was because Ji Wuming's earlier attack was simply too powerful. Without absolute confidence, how could he dare to attack? What if he ended up humiliating himself? Moreover, there were still Xu Yaring, Tang Minglong, Ling Han, and other peak-level emperors here. It wouldn't be their turn to stand out, right? I just want to test your strength, Ji Wuming said calmly. Such a reply made many people furious. Could one fight without saying a word just because they were strong? What if they were injured? Of course, no one would say such words. Could it be that martial artists were afraid of fighting? Those from the wide prosperity heaven all went towards Xu Yaring and Tang Minglong, while those from the calm peace heaven went towards Ling Han and Hu Niu. However, Xu Yaring and Tang Minglong were only staring at Ji Wuming. To be more precise, they were staring at the white bow in his hand. Hu Niu also made a slight sound of surprise and said, I seem to have some impression of that bow. She thought for a moment, then suddenly clapped her hands and said, That's the little universal Mi bow. What? Ling Han quickly asked. Niu doesn't know very clearly either. I only have some vague impressions. That's a celestial tool, and it's a very, very powerful one at that, Hu Niu said with a nod, looking very serious and serious. That's right, the little universal Amitabha bow, Xu Yaring continued. The body of the bow is made from the branches of the world tree, and the bowstring is made from the main tendon of the 9th heaven immortal dragon king. With just a pull of the bowstring, it can shatter the heavens. World tree, 9th heaven immortal dragon king tendon. The world tree was one of the 9 great ancestral trees of the world essence. With that tree as the body of the bow, nothing should be able to surpass it. And the main tendon of a 9th heaven immortal dragon king was even more terrifying, because heaven and earth essence could only represent immortal kings, but a 9th heaven immortal king represented the pinnacle of immortal kings. Just these 2 items alone were supreme treasures. When they were added together to form a celestial artifact, the value was simply unimaginable. That was why even though this thing was as small as a toy, its power was incomparably shocking. As long as news of it spread, even immortal kings would be moved. Regardless of whether it was openly or secretly, they would definitely all make a move. Even Ling Han was a little tempted, but as long as others did not provoke him, he would not rob them just because they had something good on them. Of course, The fact that Ji Wuming had attacked him for no reason had already infuriated Ling Han. Hee hee, good eyesight. Ji Wuming smiled. Everyone, the Three Flowers Valley is about to open. Heaven and Earth's source energy will appear. You don't mind having another competitor, right? Which heaven domain do you belong to? Asked Shu Yaring. Wandering the world, not belonging to any heaven region. Nameless Ji's answer was very vague. In fact, he called himself Nameless, which made it extremely difficult for others to figure out his identity. A peak-tier emperor with a peak-tier celestial artifact had suddenly appeared. No matter how one looked at it, it was very unnatural. Shu Yaring said indifferently, everyone has a share of natural treasures. Whether or not one can obtain them depends on fate and strength. I am quite confident in my own strength, said Nameless Ji with a smile. His gaze swept across everyone, and a strange smile appeared on his face. He also sat down at the side, closed his eyes, and pretended to sleep. This caused everyone to be furious. This fellow had just attacked them, but he actually dared to sit down in front of them as if nothing had happened. How could they not be angry? But whether it was Shu Yaring or Tang Minglong, neither of them had any intention of making a move. This caused the people from Wide Prosperity Heaven to become listless. On the Calm Peace Heaven's side, Ling Han was quite interested. He had a feeling that this Ji Wuming was on the same level as Shu Yaring and Tang Minglong. He was strong enough to become a formidable opponent. This caused his battle intent to boil. Very good, I can fight to my heart's content. Just at this moment, someone suddenly called out, the mystery realm has opened. At the entrance, the clouds and mist quickly dissipated, revealing a valley path that led downwards. It was very wide, at least 3,000 meters wide. Moreover, it was very flat, as if it had been carved out by a saber or sword. Really, there were clear signs of the stones being shaved off, so it could not have been formed by weathering. It is said that after Supreme Celestial King's battle, the battlefield can possibly transform into a mystery realm of heaven and earth, someone said slowly. This Three Flowers Valley was also formed in such a way? Ahead, the speed at which the mist faded became faster and faster. It was as if it had been absorbed by the earth, and their vision became incredibly clear. Let's go! Someone immediately leaped out and entered the valley. It did not matter if one's strength was weak. As long as they reached the fiery flame lightning strike would first, they would win a chance to be chosen. Which one here was not at least an emperor tier, and emperor tiers were not awesome enough. So, stupid birds should just fly first. Let's go as well. Hunyo called out excitedly, holding onto Ling Han's arm. All right, let's go as well. Ling Han smiled. He first drew the heavenly phoenix divine maiden into the Black Tower. Those whose cultivation level had reached the dividing soul tier or surpassed it could not enter, but that did not mean that those below the severing mundane tier could enter and exit as they pleased. Only severing mundane tiers were allowed. Hunyo walked energetically at the front, practically as if she was dragging Ling Han along. Meanwhile, Ling Han walked side by side with the Empress, and at the back was bewitching Maiden Ro, who looked a little like a little wife who had been bullied. Previously, she had only been afraid of the Empress, and now there was Hunyo. Both women had her completely restrained. The Empress was dignified, born to be a ruler, while Hunyo was unreasonable. If you did not obey, she would beat you until you did. Yen Xianlu and the others also moved out. They had long since formed an alliance, and could use formations to fight against beings stronger than themselves. Thus, they were similarly filled with confidence. The competition officially began at this moment. Obtaining the source power of heaven and earth naturally would allow them to be reborn, and close the gap between them and Supreme Monarch tiers. The valley path slanted downwards, and the further down they went, the wider the path. Occasionally, earth chi would emerge, turning into multiple flowers of great Tao that bloomed, incredibly beautiful. But no one dared to touch them. If they touched them, they would either die or be injured, and it would be a serious injury that they might never be able to recover from. These flowers had no roots and would slowly drift, so they had to dodge at the first instant. Though they were drifting very slowly, It was as if they could teleport. In truth, they were not slow at all, so they had to maintain absolute caution. Furthermore, the further down they went, the more flowers of great Tao there were. They almost covered the entire valley path, making it difficult for people to set foot on them. Ling Han and the others were all very careful. Here, even Hu Niu did not dare to act rashly. This made the little girl very displeased, and she pouted, her unhappiness written all over her face. Thankfully, only the flowers of great Tao were drifting. If an enemy had run out now, that would really be difficult to deal with. After a whole 3 days, the path ahead finally became flat. Had they reached the bottom? For whom does the bell toll? A low voice rang out. Cell phones read more refreshingly. Chapter 1965. A person appeared in front of him. However, it was really difficult to use the word human to describe him. It could only be said that he had a humanoid shape, and his body was covered in spikes. Moreover, the thickness of the spikes varied, making him appear extremely strange. These spikes didn't look like decorations at all. Instead, they grew out of his body and looked natural. Ling Han and the others were all astonished. This humanoid figure was definitely a creature from the Three Flowers Valley. Otherwise, they would never have thought that such a monster would be able to arrive before them. There are actually living things in this place? He had never heard Yen Xianlu mention this before. Ling Han did not think that Yen Xianlu would deliberately conceal such a clue. Of course, it could not possibly be that the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King had deliberately not told this beloved disciple of his either. Then there could only be one reason, and that was that this monster had only been born in the last 100 million years. Perhaps it was tens of millions of years ago, perhaps it was millions of years ago, or even just a short 3 to 5 days ago. How could the mysteries of heaven and earth be easily fathomed? Who are the war drums for? The humanoid monster continued to speak in a low voice. Combined with the context of its words, it sounded like a veteran who had experienced many vicissitudes of life, reflecting on the war. Damn monster, what are you pretending to be so profound for? Don't you just want to fight? Come, Niu will keep you company. Hu Niu shouted loudly, but before the humanoid monster could make a move, the Empress had already rushed out first. Hong, a palm strike, and sword chi swept out. Weiya, you're so despicable, this is Niu's. Hu Niu stomped her feet, and also charged out to attack that humanoid monster. The strength of the humanoid monster was clear at a glance. Sun Soul Stage. Against a severing mundane tier, this should be an absolute suppression. Unfortunately, whether it was the Empress or Hu Niu, they were not ordinary severing mundane tiers, but rather fifth severance monarch tiers. In terms of realms, they were equivalent to Yang souls, and in terms of combat strength, they were invincible even if they were one level higher. In other words, they could even defeat Yin soul experts. Under the joint attacks of the two women, how could this humanoid monster block them? Pung, 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 under a flurry of attacks, he was soon blown to pieces. The strange thing was that this humanoid monster did not have a body. Under the pile of spikes, its body was actually empty. There was only a scarlet stone that looked like a heart, but it was only the size of a little finger. Why are you fighting with Niu? Hu Niu did not give up, and continued to stare at the Empress. Meanwhile, the Empress couldn't be bothered to pay any attention to her. She wore an expression that said, "You're just a child and I won't lower myself to your level." Detestable bewitching woman. Hu Niu stomped her foot in anger, clinging to the Empress without letting go, insisting on demanding an explanation. Sometimes she was very persistent. Ling Han, on the other hand, picked up the crimson stone. However, the moment his hand touched it, a boundless blood-red light immediately surged in his mind. Flashes of sabers and shadows of swords filled the air, killing everywhere. He immediately revealed a look of surprise and said, "Slaughter law." There were regulations of slaughter in the Black Tower, and he had already comprehended some superficial knowledge of them. Thus, he was not at all unfamiliar with this kind of regulations. The Empress's interest was instantly piqued, and she walked over to investigate as well. Hey, Big Vixen, you still haven't told me why you want to fight with Niu over him. Hunyo was relentless. Regulations of slaughter? Bewitching Maiden Ro also came over, similarly filled with interest. You mean that there is regulations of slaughter contained within this? The regulations of slaughter were outside of the 5 elements and lightning element, and there was basically no chance to comprehend them normally. They were incredibly precious. Ling Han glared at her and said, "Even if I did, it has nothing to do with you." Bewitching Maiden Ro was furious. This unromantic and impulsive man, she really wanted to strangle him to death. Ling Han tossed the stone to the Empress. He possessed the Black Tower and could comprehend regulations of slaughter at any moment, so he did not need this kind of thing. The Empress naturally would not be courteous, and put the blood-colored stone away. Bewitching Maiden Ro pouted slightly. She, too, wanted it very much, but Ling Han actually did not even ask her. How detestable. Big Vixen, Nyo is talking to you. Hunyo was still unwilling to give up. Just as Hunyo kept asking questions, they advanced for about 2 or 3 miles, and another humanoid monster covered in spikes appeared. Hunyo gave a strange cry, and hurriedly made the first move. Very soon she killed this monster. As expected, the spikes landed on the ground. They were hollow inside, and there was only a small stone that was as crimson as blood. It's still the regulations of slaughter. Ling Han nodded, and tossed the stone to the Empress. Since the valley here had already become a stretch of flat land, there was no longer the concept of a path, but rather a massive plain. Thus, they were like pebbles thrown into the sea, unable to raise a single ripple. The direction that each person chose was definitely slightly different, and after traveling a long distance, this kind of gap would be huge. Thus, Ling Han and the others did not catch up to the people in front, nor were they caught up by the people behind. It was impossible to tell whether they were in the lead or lagging behind. Hoo, 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 a strange beast's roar rang out, and a strange demonic beast appeared in front of them. Its appearance should be like a pig, but similarly, its entire body was covered in spikes, which instantly caused it to become a size larger, giving off a malevolent and oppressive feeling. "I'll do it!" Bewitching Maiden Ro rushed out. If this monster was still killed by Ling Han, the Empress, or Hunyo, she would be too embarrassed to even ask for a share of that gemstone that contained regulations of slaughter. But she had delivered a blow first, and even if it was all drama afterwards, her thick skin would still be able to get a share, right? She directly moved, and with a shake of her hand, a peachwood sword had already appeared, slashing out at the sword pig. Xiao, sword chi surged, turning into a brilliant flash of light. This strike landed on the sword pig's body, but not even a single spike was severed. Instead, this sword pig set its eyes on her, and a fiendish aura instantly surged out, causing Bewitching Maiden Ro's pretty face to pale, and she almost fainted. This was regulations of slaughter, incredibly terrifying. Even Ling Han's expression changed, and he said, "Not good, this guy is Earth's soul tier." Hong, long, long, the sword pig had already raised its 4 hooves, charging towards Ling Han and the others. "Come, give it a try." Ling Han was in high spirits, and threw out a punch to meet it. Ling Han was immediately sent flying, his figure as fast as a cannonball. After being sent flying for several hundred miles, Ling Han finally slowed down. The clothes on his abdomen were already in tatters, revealing a circular wound, and a bloody mark had also appeared on his lower abdomen. He had actually been wounded in this blow. Battle prowess of Earth's soul tier was indeed frightening. Ling Han rubbed his lower abdomen, and gritted his teeth repeatedly, as expected of regulations of slaughter. Otherwise, mere Earth Soul Tier would not have damaged his physical body so easily. This bit of injury was not enough to make him collapse, but the problem was that his attack power was far inferior to his defense power. Fighting with this sword pig would only result in being blasted, so why bother? Hide in the Black Tower. Ling Han shook his head and used spatial movement. Xiao, he instantly appeared in front of that sword pig again. The divine demon sword was unsheathed, and he slashed out. One brilliant light shone, and sword chi soared into the sky. The sword pig naturally would not be afraid. Its whole body trembled, and Xiao Countless spikes shot out, blasting towards Ling Han. In that instant, this sword pig became a naked pig. Ling Han stretched out a hand and said softly, "Time, stop." Wang, whether it was the sword pig or the sword spikes that filled the sky, they all entered a state of stillness at the same time. Chapter 1966. This was not Ling Han's ability, but rather the might of the Black Tower. When the flow of time slowed to an extreme, it stopped. Shua. The divine demon sword slashed over. Poof. A large pig's head flew into the air. However, it instantly disintegrated into nothingness. Meanwhile, the pig's body collapsed with a loud rumble. Similarly, it also disintegrated into pieces. Only a crimson stone that was as red as blood remained. Ling Han used the divine demon sword as a support, panting heavily, his expression very unsightly. The price of using this move was too great, completely draining his body, not only origin power, but also his soul. His whole person seemed to have become a blank sheet of paper, with only the word empty left. Time acceleration and deceleration could be used at will, but the greater the effect and the wider the range, the greater the consumption. This extreme stop of time caused Ling Han to directly lose the ability to continue fighting. Furthermore, this move could only be used once a month in the real world, and it was useless even in the time acceleration chamber. The Black Tower needed to draw some kind of power from the real world. "Ling Han, you're so sweet." Niu immediately pounced on him. "You killed an Earth Soul level monster with a single move. Awesome, awesome, Niu wants to have babies with you." Everything the little girl said was for the last sentence, but Ling Han was only willing to hug and kiss her, which made Niu very displeased. Peng, Ling Han was instantly pushed onto the ground. He had no strength at all now. Niu giggled and kissed Ling Han's face continuously. Not only did she kiss, but she also licked and bit, like a kitten. Meanwhile, bewitching Maiden Ro was incredibly shocked. That was an Earth Soul level monster just now, and it was actually killed by Ling Han with a single strike. Just how strong were you? Yet she did not know that this was not Ling Han's own battle prowess, but the might of the Black Tower, which could only be used once a month, and had almost drained Ling Han dry. If there were a few more enemies, that would be an act of seeking death. However, this time, she could shamelessly go and pick up that blood-colored stone. But when she moved, she saw the Empress wave her hand and snatch the stone first. "Sister," she called out, aggrieved. The Empress swept a dignified glance over her and said, "I have my own plans on how to distribute them." Bewitching Maiden Ro began to play with her fingers. In front of the Empress, she did not have the slightest bit of temper. "Little girl, get up." Ling Han was about to suffocate from Niu's kisses, yet neither of the two girls had any intention of helping him. Niu giggled and said, "Let's give birth to monkeys." She couldn't forget it. Ling Han lectured her righteously and took out a considerable amount of food. Only then did the little girl temporarily forget about the matter of giving birth to a monkey. He recovered some of his strength and could finally stand up and walk around. "What kind of stone is this?" "It actually contains a trace of the slaughter rules." Ling Han asked Queen to take out the blood-colored stones. It was obvious that the stone that represented the earthly soul monster was larger. "This is the blood stone of a celestial king," Small Tower suddenly said. Celestial kings battled fiercely, and blood spilled onto the earth. These stones were stained with a sliver of the celestial king's blood, yet did not shatter. Then, after countless years of evolution, a strange change occurred, Small Tower explained. Ling Han came to a sudden realization. No wonder there had been strange humanoid creatures and demonic beasts previously, but when they were killed, they did not have a physical body. As it turned out, everything was only the doing of the blood left behind by a celestial king. As expected of a celestial king. Only a little bit of blood had been spilled, yet it could still cause such an astonishing change after countless years. Then this celestial king must have cultivated the slaughter rules, he said with certainty. At least a seventh heaven celestial king. Small Tower also made a deduction. The rumors were not false. Many mystery realms of heaven and earth were battlefields left behind by celestial kings. They had the immortal will of celestial kings, and after countless years of evolution, the power of heaven and earth had also been added in, causing them to become mystery realms of heaven and earth. Ling Han nodded and said to the Empress, "Put it away. Come, we should be able to encounter more such monsters, and obtain more celestial king bloodstones." He roughly repeated what Small Tower had said. Under ordinary circumstances, one could only comprehend the regulations of the 5 elements and lightning element, and other regulations could only be obtained through celestial medicine or some unique treasures, but the might of these regulations was even stronger, and could be maintained all the way until the celestial king tier. Thus, the value of these celestial king bloodstones was extraordinarily high. On the other hand, the value of the Black Tower was really astonishing. It actually had the regulations of time, space, and slaughter. If Ling Han still could not become an emperor that could sweep over all his peers after comprehending these regulations, then he was really too useless. The 4 of them continued on their way. Very soon, they encountered another humanoid monster. Hu Niu and the Empress rushed over together and dealt with it in a few moves. But next, they encountered a big problem. It was another beast-shaped monster that possessed battle prowess of the Earth's soul tier, and crushed Ling Han and the others into running all over the place. Thankfully, this monster seemed to have a fixed range of activity. After leaving this range, this monster also stopped, and did not pursue them anymore. The 4 of them exchanged glances, and suddenly broke out in laughter. In a battle of equals, they had never been crushed into running all over the place before. This was a very new experience. When I break through to the dividing soul tier, I will be able to beat up these monsters. Ling Han rubbed his nose. Unfortunately, Time Halt could only be used once a month. Otherwise, he would not need to run. However, when we break through to the dividing soul tier, there is no way for us to enter this place again, the Empress said. Niu can do it. Hu Niu raised her hand and said, Niu also has a great ultimate move. Killing this monster is like killing a chicken. How often can you use it? Ling Han asked. 3 months. Hu Niu raised 3 fingers. Ling Han nodded and said, don't waste it on these small fries. Unless you encounter a life and death crisis, this is used to save your life. All right, Niu understands. Hu Niu nodded obediently. They continued to venture deeper, and if they encountered Yang Soul or Yin Soul monsters, they would kill them. If they encountered Earth Soul monsters, they could only turn tail and run. After a few times, they had also deviated from their original direction, but they could be sure that they were still heading deeper into the valley. Because with those 3 peaks as a guide, it was impossible that they had lost their way. This valley was astonishingly large, and they could not use their movement techniques to sprint at full speed. Thus, their advancing speed naturally would not be fast. A whole 3 months had passed, and they had not even traveled half the distance. That was because they had not yet reached the foot of the 3 peaks. This was the sign of half the distance. According to Yan Xianlu, there are also fated opportunities on the 3 peaks, Ling Han said. However, the Eternal Prosperity Celestial King did not tell him the specifics. Then let's go. It should not take up too much time. The Empress nodded. They advanced towards the peak on the left. 7 days later, Hu Niu suddenly stopped, and then revealed a sniffing appearance. Even her eyes narrowed. Smells so good. With regards to the nose of a glutton, Ling Han naturally had complete faith in it. He asked, what do you smell? The fragrance of a celestial medicine. Hu Niu opened her eyes. It smells so good. It is at least 5 billion years old, and has at least achieved small success. Then we have to go. The 4 of them changed their path, and with Hu Niu leading the way, they followed the scent all the way. After walking for about 50 miles, Ling Han and the Empress finally smelled a refreshing fragrance. True enough, they could not compare with a glutton. Chapter 1968. The bottom of the pond was finally about to be seen. Ling Han exerted more force, and the 9 heavens flame burned fiercely, evaporating the last bit of water vapor. Now that the pond was empty, there wouldn't be a single drop of liquid left. Ling Han used the divine demon sword as a shovel and began to dig in the pond. After spending another 7 days, he finally managed to clear out all of the intertwined roots of the celestial bamboo. Then he stored it into the Black Tower. Unfortunately, the Black Tower couldn't nurture this celestial bamboo either, unless it was like the 7 lives divine clouds, which had developed intelligence and could cultivate on its own. Ling Han processed the celestial bamboo. Although the fruit was extremely poisonous, it had great uses. It could be used as a great killing weapon. He plucked the bamboo pieces and placed them under the reincarnation tree. Firstly, it could preserve them and lock in the loss of the regulations of heaven and earth. Secondly, it could be imbued with the aura of the reincarnation tree, which could further enhance the medicinal effects. Meanwhile, the bamboo body was temporarily useless, and Ling Han couldn't draw too much power from the Black Tower either. He couldn't process 6-star pseudo-divine metal. Forget it, I'll hand it over to a skilled craftsman to make something out of it after I get out. Ling Han exited the Black Tower, a smile appearing on his face. After working hard for more than a month, he finally had a bountiful harvest. Now was not the time to divide the spoils, so the 4 of them immediately set off again. They had been delayed for more than a month, and they did not know if it would affect their chances of obtaining the treasures on the 3 mountain peaks. Of course, they encountered many monsters along the way, and a few of them were at the Earth Soul level. Ling Han did not use the power of the Black Tower, and instead used the poisonous fruit of the mottled red-green bamboo to deal with one of them, testing its effects. He had only used a tiny bit of it, and it had touched the tip of the divine demon sword. In the end, when the sword stabbed down, the monster was immediately corroded. Of course, Ling Han's body had also been pierced by the monster's spikes. He was bleeding profusely and had almost injured his god's bones. After all, it was a critical strike on the level of the Earth Soul. Even if it was someone like Yen Xianlu, he would probably be knocked out by this, but Ling Han had only lost a little blood. The strength of his physique could be considered freakish. The sword poison was used 7 times before it weakened, and by the 11th time, it was no longer effective. Though his whole body was riddled with holes, Ling Han was very satisfied. There were more and more Celestial King bloodstones, and it should be enough for the Empress and Hunyo to grasp a preliminary grasp of the regulations of slaughter. This regulation was really extraordinarily powerful, and anyone who used it would know. Fairy Row, what about me? Since they did not need to take detours, Ling Han and the others naturally sped up. Another 2 months later, they finally arrived at the foot of the mountain on the left. From afar, it was a peak. Up close, it was simply an incomparably huge mountain. Its circumference was unknown, but in any case, it was ridiculously large. From time to time, vein-like patterns would shine on the mountain, as if they were alive and breathing. Raising his head, he saw that there were a few people who had just started to climb. Their speed was originally very fast, but when the vein-like patterns shone, they immediately stopped and firmly held onto the mountain. Only when the vein-like patterns dimmed did they continue to climb. Someone suddenly let go and fell from the sky. There was the regulations of gravity here, far surpassing the level that severing mundane tier could grasp, so no one could fly here. He directly fell onto the ground, smashing out a deep pit. After a while, that person crawled out of the pit. His whole body was covered in blood, and a few bones had pierced out, broken, reaching the bone marrow. So tragic. That person hurriedly ate a medicinal pill, then sat down and channeled his cultivation technique to guide the medicinal effects, recovering his battle prowess as quickly as possible. Being seriously injured in this kind of mystery realm of heaven and earth was a very dangerous thing. Even if the opposing forces did not kill him, there were other dangers, such as the monsters that ran amok here. Let's go too. The 4 of them climbed up the mountain. Once they left the ground, they immediately felt the terrifying gravity. Even monarch tiers and emperor tiers like them were strained. Ling Han, Nyo wants you to carry me. With a paw, Hunyo hung onto Ling Han's back. So heavy! Ling Han gritted his teeth. Adding another person was not just a matter of doubling the difficulty. The Empress took a look and did not speak. She directly hugged over, grabbing onto one of Ling Han's arms. It couldn't be helped. The best position was already occupied by Hunyeo. Bewitching Maiden Ro's heart moved, and she also shamelessly moved over, grabbing onto Ling Han's other arm. Fuck, don't you guys have arms or legs? Ling Han hissed. The weight of 3 people added onto his body made the pressure he had to endure at least 100 times higher. Immediately, he felt as if his arms and legs were about to be torn off. And this was still because his physique was incredibly tough. Otherwise, his arms and legs would have been broken by now. However, this could be seen as a pretty good form of training. Ling Han no longer grimaced in pain, but rather began to climb up with a solemn expression. With this movement, the gravity became much stronger, and sweat immediately seeped out of his forehead. His whole body was soon drenched in sweat. Wang, the mountain suddenly lit up, and a pattern streaked over from the summit like lightning. Though it was the first time Ling Han had experienced it, he had learned from the mistakes of others, and hurriedly stopped moving, sticking his body tightly against the mountain. Ping, ping, pung, the pattern surged, and the mountain produced a powerful repulsive force, wanting to send all external objects flying. Thankfully, Ling Han stuck firmly and held on tightly. Otherwise, he would definitely have been sent flying with the 3 women. No wonder those people had stopped moving at this time, but some had still been sent flying down. It was indeed very powerful. Ling Han rallied his spirits and climbed all the way up. His willpower was incredibly tough. At the time, he had even taken the initiative to use the Black Murderous Curse as a form of training. This kind of willpower was definitely on the level of a freak. Even with 3 women, his speed actually became faster and faster, like a spirit monkey climbing through the mountain. In just less than an hour, the people ahead were already in sight. Xiao, he turned into a wisp of smoke and overtook them. It was a man and a woman, and they seemed to be lovers. Because they were very close to each other, when Ling Han passed by, the man even deliberately leaned against the woman's side, protecting her. When they saw that Ling Han was not only walking on flat ground, but was also carrying 3 women, both of them revealed shocked expressions. It was simply unimaginable. After a while, the woman said in a sweet voice, "Brother Ma, I want you to carry me too." "Okay, come up." The man gritted his teeth and agreed. The woman jumped onto the man's body and hung onto him. The man immediately gritted his teeth, and his forehead was full of wrinkles. It was too fucking heavy. He gritted his teeth and began to slowly climb up, but it was like an ordinary person carrying 1,000 kilograms of weight. It was incomparably difficult not to move, and if he moved, it would directly cost him his life. Just at this moment, a pattern transmitted over, and the man hurriedly stood tightly on the mountain rock, but a strong vibration attacked him, and he could not hold onto the mountain rock at all, and was directly sent flying. The man and woman let out miserable cries at the same time, and in their hearts, there were even 10,000 curses galloping over. It was all Ling Han's fault. If it wasn't for him showing off in front of them, how could they have learned to walk? As expected, this highly difficult skill of showing off affection was not something that just anyone could learn. Motherfucker. Xiao, the 2 of them very quickly turned into small black dots, and could not be seen again. Chapter 1969. Another month later, Ling Han finally stopped. It was not that they had already reached the summit, but rather that the terrain here had become flat, and they no longer had to hold on to the precipitous mountain walls to move forward. The 3 girls all reluctantly let go. They would become addicted to lying on Ling Han's body. His manly body scent made them addicted. Especially bewitching Maiden Ro. This was the first time she had such intimate contact with Ling Han, and her face immediately turned into a peach blossom. Her eyes were watery and silky, indescribably sweet. Ling Han breathed a sigh of relief and said, "You guys are really heavy. I have to lose weight in the future." He could run fast, but it did not mean that the pressure he had endured just now had lessened. It was just that his willpower was strong, and he had forcibly restrained himself. What woman liked to hear someone say that she was heavy, especially when this person was her lover? Thus, Ling Han was ganged up on by the three girls. After a series of showy but impractical punches, the four of them finally continued forward. There was no mountain path here. The rugged mountain path rose and fell, and every mountain rock was strangely shaped. With the cry of a crane, a celestial crane appeared. It spread its wings and soared into the sky, and there was actually a person on its back. He had white brows and a white beard, and had the air of an immortal. The speed of the celestial crane was extraordinarily fast. With just a few flaps of its wings, it had already disappeared from the summit. Ling Han and the others looked at each other, and could all see the shock in each other's eyes. What situation was this? A celestial crane had actually appeared in the mystery realm of heaven and earth? Ha! The four of them exclaimed again, because the rugged mountain rocks in the surroundings had actually disappeared, and a wide and long white jade path had appeared, winding all the way to the summit. Even standing here, they seemed to be able to feel a lofty palace at the summit. The walls were made of bronze, and it exuded an indescribable aura that could suppress heaven and earth, and suppress the passage of time. They could even feel that there were many people on the mountain path who were worshipping along the way. They were like the most devout believers, kowtowing 3 times with every step as they walked towards the summit at an extremely slow speed. With each kowtow, the bronze palace seemed to become slightly brighter. Though this change was extremely minute, Ling Han and the others were either monarch tier or emperor tier, so they could still feel this change. This is telekinesis, Hunyo said. Faith is also a kind of power, and it is a kind of power that is independent of heaven and earth, and not controlled by the great Tao. Don't say that the power of a single believer is weak, but the power of faith of tens of thousands or even hundreds of millions of believers will result in a qualitative change. Ling Han nodded. Is it equivalent to the power of the nation? It's different. The power of the nation needs to be established first, using the totem as a medium to gather the strength of the people. Hunyo shook her head. As the heir of a 9th heaven celestial king tier force, and moreover, she had the brand left behind by a 9th heaven celestial king, her knowledge was extremely vast. The height of faith is much higher than the power of the nation. Moreover, the power of the nation is a sense of belonging to the country, but faith is for the individual. It's completely different. However, the power of faith also has a weakness. Why would a believer believe in you? Hunyo paused. Because believers would always encounter difficulties, and at that time, they would seek help from the God of faith. If they did not receive a response, this believer might lose his faith. It might be very difficult for a single believer to encounter difficulties even in 100 years, but if there were many of them, then it would be too troublesome. Ling Han nodded and said, going by that, this place was once the dojo of a celestial king, but one day, a great battle occurred, and everything was destroyed, turning into the original form of the Three Flowers Valley. Later, the power of heaven and earth began to transform this place, and the present Three Flowers Valley came into being, the Empress continued. So, all of this is an illusion. It's a flourishing scene left behind from innumerable years ago when the Celestial King's dojo still existed, bewitching Maiden Row added. As they spoke, that magnificent mountain path and those devout believers suddenly all disappeared. After all, this was only a fragment in the long river of history. It had long since passed away, and could only be something for later generations to pay homage to. Ling Han and the others all sighed slightly. Back then, that celestial king was at least a 7th heaven being, and should have been immortal, but now, he had completely disappeared in the long river of history, and no one even knew what his title was. Even a celestial king was like this, so what else could be immortal, truly able to break free from the shackles of life and death, and be immortal? Hunyo began to wrinkle her nose again. Smells so good. Another immortal medicine? Ling Han asked. He naturally trusted the little lass's sense of smell. Hunyo tilted her head, and after thinking for a moment, she said, it should be a celestial medicine, but it's a little strange. What's strange about it? Ling Han asked. I don't know how to describe it. Anyway, it's very strange. Ling Han thought about it and said, no matter what, let's look around first. It was still Hunyo who led the way. Not long after, Ling Han and the Empress also smelled the scent that was unique to celestial medicine. That was the scent that they knew with a single sniff. It instantly allowed their spirit to merge with the great Tao, and was not something that could be replaced by anything else. They continued to search for the fragrance. Soon, they found an incomparably deep and serene cave. The fragrance of the immortal medicine came from this cave. There's the smell of blood. Hunyo wrinkled her nose again, revealing a fierce glint. She was especially sensitive to things like killing intent. Was it because the people who arrived here before had a dispute over the immortal medicine, and a great battle broke out? Everyone be careful. Ling Han strode forward, heading into the cave. They had already come this far, so there was naturally no reason to give up halfway. Naturally, they had to go in as well. The Empress and the others all followed, but they made a circle inside, yet did not discover anything. The medicinal fragrance was still there, but there was no trace of the celestial medicine. Perhaps it's been taken away by someone. Let's go. The four of them all shook their heads, exited the cave, and continued up the mountain. When Ling Han and the others completely disappeared, a person walked out of the cave. It was Ji Wuming. His eyes flickered and he murmured, "All four are divine fetus. If I swallow them, my divine fetus will definitely advance further." Unfortunately, those three people are not to be trifled with, especially that little girl. She should be the reincarnation of some old friend. Forget it, I'll catch enough fish here first, and then think of a way to swallow the divine fetus of those four people. Someone else has come. He showed a menacing expression, and slowly retreated into the cave. The fragrance of the celestial medicine wafted out indistinctly. A man's figure flashed past, and he suddenly stopped. His eyes looked into the cave, and he showed an expression of joy. This was a monarch tier of the wide prosperity heaven, and he was ranked 13th. His strength was very astonishing. In the cave, vision was affected, and space was also limited. If someone was lying in ambush and launching a sneak attack, that would be a very bad thing. But he only smiled proudly and strode forward. He was a mighty monarch tier, so what was there to be afraid of? He had not entered for long when he heard the sounds of intense battle from inside the cave. The mountain here was frighteningly sturdy, and even a battle between severing mundane tier monarch tiers could not damage it. However, a terrifying storm of energy continuously surged out from the entrance of the cave. But in a short while, the cave recovered its calm. Ji Wuming walked out, a sliver of blood at the corner of his lips, but he stretched out his tongue and licked it clean. He showed a satisfied smile. "I am only 9 more top-grade divine fetus, and my heaven's stolen fortune art will be completed." Chapter 1970. If Ling Han and the others were here, they would definitely discover that Ji Wuming's current aura was slightly different from before. His whole person exuded a demonic aura, but it did not make others feel uncomfortable. He tilted his head slightly. Someone else has come, but it seems like he will not be easy to deal with. He had not finished speaking when a short man suddenly appeared. His face was covered in wrinkles, and it was as if he would collapse at any moment. "Tang Minglong. We should have met before, right?" Tang Minglong stared at Ji Wuming. Ji Wuming broke into a smile. "Didn't you introduce yourself at the entrance of the valley a few months ago?" Tang Minglong shook his head. "A little earlier." Ji Wuming also shook his head. "This is my first time coming to the calm peace heaven, so it should be impossible." Tang Minglong stared into Ji Wuming's eyes, and calmly said, "I am not talking about this life of yours." The smile on Ji Wuming's face immediately disappeared, and he also stared at Tang Minglong. The two of them just stared at each other and neither spoke. "You give me a very bad feeling." Tang Minglong was expressionless. "I don't care if you cause trouble elsewhere, but I will not allow you to take one step into the wide prosperity heaven. Otherwise, I will kill you." Ji Wuming did not speak at first, but after a while, a smile appeared on his lips, and then he laughed loudly. "I know, you should be that person with the surname Shao, right? I really did not think that you also had the chance to reincarnate. Aren't you the same?" Tang Minglong asked calmly. Seeing that Tang Minglong did not deny it, the smile on Ji Wuming's face faded, turning into a mocking expression. Shao Tianxiong, 8th Heaven Celestial King, your battle prowess is not ordinary. Unfortunately, you have already died, and a remnant soul has obtained a chance to be reborn. What can you do to me? It is more than enough to kill you. Tang Minglong said darkly, his tone suddenly becoming incredibly cold. If their conversation was heard by others severing mundane tears, they would definitely pale in shock. Ji Wuming really was the reincarnation of a celestial king, and he was an 8th Heaven Celestial King, only a step away from the peak stage. In the entire celestial realm, he could be considered a top-tier existence. However, even this type of immortal king died, only leaving behind a strand of ruined soul. Through some type of reincarnation, he came back to life. His past lifestyle skills were all erased, so he could only start from scratch. Ji Wuming wasn't afraid at all. He said leisurely, Shao Tianxiong, do you know why I reincarnated? Seeing Tang Minglong's disapproving expression, he continued, I didn't die in my previous life. I abandoned my immortal king body and barged into the land of reincarnation. What? This time, Tang Minglong finally revealed a shocked expression. Even his entire body was covered with a layer of goosebumps, as if he was a mortal who had encountered a ghost. He stuttered, unable to complete his sentence. Ji Wuming grinned. It's very difficult for me to kill you now, and it's even more impossible for you to kill me. So, it's better for us to mind our own business. Otherwise, I'll be able to kill you easily even if I have to use a few of my trump cards. Surprisingly, Tang Minglong didn't refute him. His entire body was still trembling. Even an ordinary 9th Heaven Celestial King can't barge into the land of reincarnation. Or you, how many battle achievements have you made to be so favored by the heaven and earth? Ji Wuming fell silent, and a rare expression of solemnity appeared on his face. After a long time, he said, I've been fighting at the border for too long, and I've already forgotten who I am. Since you've also returned from there, you should know how grim the situation there is. Yes. Tang Mingjing nodded solemnly. There was a sliver of respect, and even reverence in his expression. This was extremely astonishing. He had been an 8th Heaven Celestial King in his past life, and he was practically one of the top elites in the world. Yet, he actually showed reverence towards another person? Just what kind of existence was that Ji Wuming? 9th Heaven Celestial King? What was going on? A 9th Heaven Celestial King could die? No. According to Ji Wuming, he had abandoned his immortal king body to barge into the land of reincarnation. That was why he had this brand new Ji Wuming who was merely at the severing mundane tier. Why did he have to do this? Wasn't a 9th Heaven Celestial King one of the top existences in the world? Yet, he still had to abandon his own body? Those old geezers only want to protect themselves. If they want to completely eradicate the tide of darkness, they can only become heavenly venerables. Ji Wuming said. His voice was drawn out, and it was like the tolling of a bell that had transcended the ages. Tang Minglong appeared even more respectful, and he said, My lord, in order to eradicate the tide of darkness, you didn't hesitate to abandon your immortal king body. I truly admire you. He showed a sliver of hesitation. Now, these young people are also the hope of the future. Please show mercy, my lord. For the sake of the great cause, there must be sacrifices, Ji Wuming said calmly. I was even willing to abandon my immortal king body and risk my life to barge into the land of reincarnation. I've already made such a sacrifice, so can't these juniors be sacrificed as well? But Tang Minglong clearly didn't agree with his words. There are no buts. Ji Wuming's tone was resolute. I've only said so much to you because you've also contributed greatly to the border. But if you say any more, I'll take your life. Tang Minglong hesitated, but he quickly said, I've crossed into the land of reincarnation only because I want to become an immortal king once more, and then go to the border to resist the tide of darkness. I've done so to protect my descendants. But my lord, if you want me to watch helplessly as you slaughter the hope of the future, then forgive me for not being able to comply. Take E from the wide prosperity heaven for example. He's an outstanding genius, and he has an extremely high chance of becoming an immortal king in the future. He can become one of the main forces in resisting the tide of darkness. Such a talent shouldn't die in the hands of Milord. Instead, he should be given a chance to grow. How short-sighted, Ji Wuming said sinisterly. He suddenly charged towards Tang Minglong, striking out with a palm. Boom! The entire world turned pitch black. Only his palm seemed to be an ancient existence that could split the heavens and split the earth apart, and could suppress everything. This possessed the might of a celestial king, yet it wasn't complete celestial king power. It was just like how Ling Han possessed the 9 heavens flame. That was clearly a celestial king tier level flame, but due to the limitation of cultivation level, it was essentially a celestial king tier flame, yet its might was much weaker. Apologies, milord, Tang Minglong said softly. Pava. The bones in his body crackled violently, and he instantly transformed from a short dwarf into a man that was 7 feet tall, exploding with supreme might. He fearlessly charged forward, filled with a strong sense of righteousness. In their last lives, that Tang Minglong was definitely no match for Ji Wuming. If an 8th heaven celestial king encountered a 9th heaven celestial king, a direct confrontation would only result in death. But now, they were both 5th severance monarch tiers, and due to the limitation of cultivation level, the might of an 8th heaven celestial king or a 9th heaven celestial king was actually not much different. Thus, the battle was extremely intense, and it was difficult to determine the victor. True enough, it was just as Ji Wuming had said at the beginning. If he wanted to kill Tang Minglong, it wouldn't be easy. He had to use some kind of ultimate move, and if Tang Minglong wanted to kill him, it would be completely impossible. The intense battle continued without end. They set off in the afternoon, and woke up at midnight the next day. It was more refreshing to read on their phones. Chapter 1972. For the sake of the true explanation of Great Tao, the calm peace heaven and the wide prosperity heaven set aside their enmity and chose to join forces. Before coming here, everyone had made sufficient preparations. For example, Yan Xianlu, Lu Jie, and the others had all prepared some kind of formation that could greatly increase their battle prowess to fight against heaven-defying freaks like Yi and Shu Yareng. But now, the heavenly soul tier monster definitely surpassed the level of Yi and Shu Yareng, so everyone had to join forces to stand against it. Ling Han actually had a trump card, and that was the poisonous fruit of the spotted red-green bamboo. With just a drop, so what if it was a heavenly soul tier monster? It was guaranteed to die immediately. But he didn't want to use it now. It was a trump card, so how could he show it all at once? Everyone gathered, but each small group was in their own formation, commanded by one person, so they were a little sparse when they went up. What's going on with Tang Minglong? He actually hasn't come yet? Shu Yareng frowned. This was a powerful existence that was similar in strength to her, and with Tang Minglong, their chances of victory would increase greatly. But they couldn't keep waiting, and now with the addition of 2 powerful existences, Ling Han and Hu Niu, they could more or less match Tang Minglong, right? She thought. Listen to my orders. Shu Yareng commanded, which made the Empress and Hu Niu very displeased. Why did they have to listen to her? Ling Han didn't mind. This was only a temporary alliance, so it didn't matter who was in command. Go! Shu Yareng took the lead, drawing out a celestial sword. As the sword swept past, a brilliant light shot out. Endless regulations rippled, as if the heaven and earth had been forcibly sliced open. After the sword ray swept past, it left behind a black hole. Everyone also moved, and there were about 100 or so prodigies moving together. Croak! That toad was originally lying down lazily and sleeping, but when everyone stepped into a certain area, it suddenly opened its eyes. They were scarlet like blood, with endless killing intent. Its whole body trembled and shio, 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 shio. The sky was filled with spikes that swept towards everyone. Every spike carried a frightening murderous aura, as if they were all supreme celestial weapons that could shatter everything. Whether this could shatter everything was unknown to Ling Han, but it could easily kill a 5th severance. He had underestimated this toad too much. Ling Han hurriedly moved in a flash, and stood in front of the Empress, Hu Niu, and bewitching Maiden Ro. He channeled the indestructible heaven scroll, raising his defenses to the maximum. Pew 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 pew. At least 7 sharp spikes attacked his body at the same time. The regulations of slaughter materialized, and black light surged, wanting to break through Ling Han's defense and pierce through him. However, Ling Han had actively channeled the indestructible heaven scroll. Even if he couldn't defeat an immortal palace tier cultivator, at least he wouldn't be able to defeat a heaven soul tier cultivator. The spikes couldn't penetrate Ling Han's body, but the huge force carried Ling Han and sent him flying backwards. Bam! Ling Han's group of 4 slammed into a steep mountain wall behind them. Swish, swish, swish. Countless fine stones fell down, and the 4 of them finally stopped their retreat. Other than Ling Han, the other 3 girls spurted out blood. Though they hadn't received a direct attack, they were still heavily wounded by the final collision. Conversely, Ling Han, under the protection of the indestructible heaven scroll, was completely unscathed. As expected of a heaven soul tier cultivator, this attack power was too terrifying. And this was only Ling Han, the others. Previously, Ling Han hadn't been in the mood to care about others, and now that he looked again, he saw a field of wounded people. Some people had their lower abdomen pierced, and some had their arms and thighs pierced. If they were directly hit in the mind, they would definitely die on the spot. Even if they weren't, their expressions were extremely ugly, and they all swallowed precious medicines or took out life-saving treasures to suppress their murderous aura. The regulations of slaughter entered their bodies, and heaven soul tier cultivators were completely suppressed. It would instantly attack the mind and destroy their spirit. Thus, for the sake of their own lives, what else could they be unwilling to do? It was too tragic. Over 100 monarchs and emperor tiers had joined forces, but they couldn't even get close. The toad had killed 7 of them, severely wounded a few dozen, and lightly wounded less than 10. Shu Yareng was naturally someone who had been lightly wounded. Though she had charged at the front lines, the second strongest severing mundane tier in the wide prosperity heaven was indeed not just for show. Her battle prowess was incredibly astonishing, and at least her defenses were definitely freakish. But now, she didn't look smug at all. She was naturally clear about how strong she was, and there was no need to be complacent. The problem was, this toad was so strong, so how could she take it down? Actually, she could deal with it alone, but she would have to pay a very high price. Furthermore, she would lose her battle prowess for a short period of time, so she naturally couldn't use it in public unless she could confirm her own absolute safety. Unfortunately, who here would earn her such trust? What should she do? The precious treasure was right in front of her, and there was no reason not to take it. However, in the outside world, heaven souls still didn't have the right to be called elites. Only immortal palace tier had this right, but here, heaven souls were like overlords, and even monarchs were helpless against them. Why don't we go and obtain the fiery flame lightning strike wood first? Someone suggested. All right, you go, someone immediately said. No one was willing to leave. After all, they didn't even know where the fiery flame lightning strike wood was. It was a massive valley, so it was easier said than done to find it. Moreover, even if they found it, whether they could obtain the acknowledgement of the source power of heaven and earth was another matter. It wasn't like this true explanation of Great Way, which could be obtained. No, as long as one could carefully study it, they would be able to improve their own abilities and benefit from it for the rest of their lives. No one was an idiot, so how could they not know how to calculate this? Let Nyo do it. Hu Nyo wiped the corner of her mouth, her eyes filled with a fierce light. They actually dared to injure her, so she was truly enraged. Ling Han shook his head and said, "Don't save your ultimate move for the last moment." He strode forwards, deciding to use the poisonous fruit of the mottled red-green bamboo. He had already planned from the beginning. If joining forces could be effective, then he would hide the mottled red-green bamboo. If it didn't work, then he would use it. He wouldn't reveal his trump card if he could, and he was determined to obtain the true explanation of Great Way of the regulations of slaughter. The toad didn't take advantage of the situation to pursue them. As long as everyone left a certain area, it wouldn't have any reaction. It would just lie down lazily and sleep. But when Ling Han stepped into a certain area, it immediately opened its eyes and fixed its eyes on Ling Han. Xiao, with a spring of its limbs, its figure leapt up. Its speed was shockingly fast, and it instantly arrived in front of Ling Han. This obviously wasn't teleportation, but it more or less achieved the same effect. A blood-red tongue spat out, and like a spirit spear, it directly attacked Ling Han's face. This attack was too fierce and too fast. Ling Han couldn't dodge at all, and was instantly slapped on the face. He felt a slight burning sensation on his face. The regulations of slaughter had turned into a sharp awl, drilling into his face until it hurt. This was still because he had the protection of the indestructible Heaven Scroll. Otherwise, if this tongue lashed out, his face would definitely have been flattened. It's my turn to attack. Ling Han drew his sword, but his hand stretched out, yet there was nothing there to exert force on. As it turned out, he had already been sent flying by this attack. Hun Yo and the Empress leapt out at the same time, catching Ling Han. Ling Han, your face was smeared with the toad's saliva. Should Nyo kiss you in the future or not? Hun Yo was extremely conflicted. If she kissed him, she would find it disgusting, and if she didn't kiss him, she wouldn't be able to control herself. Nyo was extremely conflicted. Phone reading was more refreshing. Chapter 1973. Ling Han could only smile wryly. Couldn't this girl's mind be filled with more normal thoughts? He stood up himself and looked at the toad that had begun to sleep again, while the scene just now replayed in his mind. I need to draw my sword earlier, he told himself. Fin. He charged out again. Pung, in an instant he was shot back like a cannonball. This time, he directly crashed into the mountain wall, causing the ground to tremble slightly. He struck too early, and the power was not enough. Fin. Pung Ping Pong. Ling Han struck 7 times in a row, but each time, he either struck too late and did not hit anything, or too early, and the power was too weak, unable to pierce through the toad's defenses and release the poison. Everyone was amused and shocked. Did you go to fight a monster, or get your ass pierced by a monster? How many times had it happened, and you still enjoyed it? But it wasn't like everyone was unaware of the toad's attack power. Even Shu Yaring didn't dare to face its might head-on, yet Ling Han had suffered 7 consecutive attacks without even a scratch on his skin. How terrifying was that? This guy was also a monster. Shu Yaring's eyes shone, and she thought, he is definitely not a celestial king that has experienced reincarnation, but if he is not a celestial king, how could he possess such powerful strength? Could it be that he is another unparalleled freak that even the reincarnation of a celestial king can only concede defeat? Is he the second freak? Ling Han shook his head. The toad was too fast, and its attacks were too swift. That fleeting instant was not easy to grasp. If he wanted to stab this monster, it would be impossible to do so without several hundred attempts. The problem was that the number of times he could actively channel the indestructible Heaven Scroll was limited, and he could only use it 3 times at most. He had to succeed as soon as possible. I can only use the regulations of time, Ling Han thought. Furthermore, he had to draw on the power of the Black Tower. Otherwise, with his 5th severance, which was equivalent to the power of Yang Soul, it would be too difficult to have any effect on a Heaven Soul. It was practically wishful thinking. Though this would exhaust his power, his own defenses would not weaken because of exhaustion, and he was not afraid that others would take the opportunity to attack him. Moreover, Hun Yo and the Empress's battle prowess were enough to guarantee their right to speak. As for Bewitching Maiden Ro's battle prowess, he completely ignored it. Bewitching Maiden Ro, it was worth a try, and it had to work. Ling Han strode out, and once again charged in the direction of the stone tablet. It was going to happen again. Everyone was already used to this scene. They all muttered in their hearts, but they couldn't help but admire Ling Han's courage. Goo! The toad's voice was completely emotionless. It did not lose interest in Ling Han because he had fucked him too many times, nor did it become angry because he had been teased too many times. Just like before, it charged out. Pa, a tongue lashed out just like before. Ling Han drew on the power of the Black Tower and pressed out with his palm. Wang, the toad suddenly stopped and very strangely floated in the air. However, it was only for an instant before it regained its original speed and shot toward Ling Han. The heavenly soul was too powerful. The time-stop spell was only effective for less than 1/100th of a heartbeat. However, this amount of time was more than enough for Ling Han. He tilted his body slightly to the side and avoided the toad's tongue. However, because the duration of the time-stop spell was too short, this tongue still whipped him. It didn't completely avoid him, and the whip sent Ling Han flying backwards again. At this moment, Ling Han raised his hand, and the divine demon sword left his hand. It turned into a streak of light and shot toward the toad. He concentrated all of his power into this one strike. Pa, Ling Han was instantly sent flying, and the divine demon sword, which carried Ling Han's hope, shot into the toad's body with a PU. Success? Everyone was so shocked that their scalps went numb. This was too shocking. The fifth severance, which was a yang soul against a heavenly soul, could actually result in injuries to both sides. This was practically unbelievable. He was definitely a fuck you monster. But immediately, many people shook their heads. So what? Even if a heavenly soul suffered a full power attack from a yang soul, it wouldn't hurt or tickle. This kind of injury to both sides would be a heavy injury for a yang soul, but for a heavenly soul, it would only be a light injury. A scratch or not even a scratch, so what effect could it have? Pa, Ling Han sat down on the ground and couldn't help but smile. If the divine demon sword grazed him, this large toad would definitely be dead. Smeared with the red-green bamboo poisonous fruit, it could even kill an immortal palace realm cultivator. The Empress and Hunyeo both came to support Ling Han. As for the divine demon sword, they temporarily couldn't be bothered with it. It was still stuck in the large toad's body. If they went to retrieve it now, wouldn't that be courting death? Peng, peng, peng. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the toad suddenly jumped violently as if it had been bewitched. After a short while, it suddenly collapsed, and the spikes all over its body scattered on the ground, revealing a red stone. Fuck, it died? Everyone was dumbfounded, feeling that this was extremely unbelievable. You only threw out a sword. Unless it was a real celestial tool that had awakened, how could it possibly kill a heavenly soul-level monster? Disbelief. Disbelief. However, in the blink of an eye, a dozen or so people immediately dashed out, targeting the divine demon sword. Whether it was a celestial tool or not, they would think about it after they got their hands on it. Wayaya, what despicable people! Hunyeo was furious and immediately charged out. You guys are too disgusting. Ling Han killed that ugly toad, and it's fine if you guys aren't grateful, but you actually want to steal his things. Nyo is going to beat you guys to death. Peng, peng, peng. She fought all of them alone and began to battle with them. Emperor Tears were no match for her at all, but there were still 3 Monarch Tears who joined the fight, and one of them was shockingly Fei Yun. These 3 people, especially Fei Yun, were not people that Hunyeo could easily deal with, and a fierce battle ensued. Ling Han was rapidly recovering his vitality, so it was not convenient for him to make a move now. Meanwhile, the Empress stayed by his side to protect him. Since the monster has been dealt with, the alliance should also be dissolved. A monarch tear from the wide prosperity heaven laughed loudly, and then his expression turned cold. Trash of the calm peace heaven, get out of my way. With a glance, it was clear that Ling Han had already lost his battle prowess, and the only one worth paying attention to on the calm peace heaven side was Hunyeo. Could this not be easily dealt with? A treasure like the true explanation of great Tao could create supreme prodigies, and the wide prosperity heaven and the calm peace heaven were in a fierce competition, so they naturally did not hope that the people of the calm peace heaven could comprehend the true explanation of great Tao. Shameless! Yen Xianlu and the others all rebuked. This monster that guarded the true explanation of great Tao had been killed by Ling Han, but now these people not only wanted to bask in his glory, but also wanted to chase away the main culprit and steal his precious tool. This was too disgusting. If you don't get out, don't blame us for being merciless. A monarch tier from the wide prosperity heaven said menacingly. His name was Yi Linfeng and he was ranked 5th. He was definitely a top-notch character. Fight it out with them. The people of the calm peace heaven were all filled with righteous indignation. Firstly, they were indeed furious, and secondly, because the true explanation of Great Tao was too tempting, who would be willing to give it up? Haha. Fei Yun laughed loudly, a sword shockingly appearing in his hand. He had snatched the divine demon sword. Chapter 1974. Fei Yun was very pleased with himself. He felt that he had gotten his revenge. Previously, Ling Han had used the iron spear to burst his chrysanthemum, making him a fool of himself in front of everyone. Now, he had snatched one of Ling Han's treasures, and had ruthlessly slapped him in the face. Awesome, this is awesome. Hun Yo stood still, staring fixedly at Fei Yun like an enraged little lion. Her black hair fluttered even though there was no wind, and her eyes were spitting flames. Hong, the sound of a great tide rose, and a giant rock appeared behind her. It flapped its wings and swung its tail, and a pattern of great Tao appeared as if it could suppress the heavens. She was truly enraged and wanted to kill this despicable person at all costs. Too disgusting, too despicable, too shameless. Fei Yun was completely unconcerned. His battle prowess should be slightly inferior to Hun Yo's, but he was still a monarch tier whose battle prowess ranked in the top 10, after all, so the difference wouldn't be too great. He was completely capable of putting up a fight. This is forged from devouring gold metal. He examined the divine demon sword, and couldn't help but feel incredibly excited. Devouring metal. As long as there was enough godly metal to devour, then it would one day advance to the level of divine metal. It was even rumored that immortal metal was not the limit of the devouring gold steel. As long as there was enough immortal metal to devour, it could continue to grow. Of course, the amount of immortal metal was pitifully small. Even the majority of immortal kings could only drool and become envious. Who would be willing to let the devouring metal devour it? However, it was undoubtedly possible for the divine demon sword to reach the level of a celestial tool. I'm rich, I'm really rich. Fei Yun laughed loudly, feeling extremely satisfied. Snatching a future immortal weapon from the hands of his enemy made him feel extremely satisfied. What? Devouring gold steel? The other emperors of wide prosperity heaven were similarly overjoyed. This was equivalent to obtaining an immortal artifact. It was no wonder that it could easily kill that heavenly soul monster. It turned out that this was a future immortal weapon. Of course, it was awesome. However, no one knew that this wasn't the power of the divine demon sword. Of course, the divine demon sword itself had also played a huge role, breaking through the toad's defenses and giving the mottled green bamboo fruit time to take effect. To them, it was the divine demon sword that had unleashed its might and killed that heavenly soul monster. Such a treasure had to be fought for. Fei Yun, hand over the sword. Right, hand it over. It belongs to our wide prosperity heaven. I can't have it all to myself. Everyone shouted. How could Fei Yun be willing? He would rather become public enemy number 1 to protect this divine sword. You all deserve to die, Hun Yo said in a low voice. Her fury had already burned to the extreme, and an indescribable aura surged out from her body, capable of crushing everything. Fei Yun and the others were greatly shocked. At this moment, Hun Yo reminded them of that freak. Even with so many people joining forces, they still felt a chill in their hearts. They did not have the slightest chance of winning. Ling Han had already recovered some of his strength. He stood up with his own strength and said indifferently, "Do you know that greed can kill people?" Everyone sneered. What kind of joke was this? According to what he said, everyone should just stay at home and not come out to fight for treasures. If you insist on seeking your own death, then you can't blame others, Ling Han said as he raised his finger slightly. Shua, a flash of sword light flashed, and the divine demon sword suddenly moved, piercing towards Fei Yun. Fei Yun was greatly shocked. Only now did he remember that this was Ling Han's treasure. Even if it had left Ling Han's hands, as long as the martial art intent within it was not erased, it could still be controlled by Ling Han. He was too excited. At first, it was because he had snatched his enemy's treasure, and then he discovered that the divine demon sword was forged from devouring metal. This made him so excited that he forgot some common sense, such as erasing the martial art intent within the sword and replacing it with his own. Of course, whether he could erase it was another matter. The sword light attacked, and Fei Yun hurriedly grabbed the hilt, wanting to swing the treasure sword away. After dodging this attack, he would immediately refine Ling Han's martial art intent and make this treasure sword truly his. However, as the sword attacked, multiple symbols of great Tao jumped, causing the heaven and earth to resonate, and its power was extraordinarily great. Although Fei Yun had successfully reversed the momentum of his sword and avoided striking any vital parts of his body, the divine demon sword had launched a sudden attack, catching him off guard. Moreover, the divine demon sword was extraordinarily powerful. Thus, the tip of the sword had still sliced into his thigh. Damn it! Fei Yun roared in anger. This was really extreme joy turning to sorrow. He had not thought that he would be made a fool of by Ling Han. He humphed and said, "This sword is still mine. Don't even think about taking it back." Such a treasure, even a celestial king would be tempted. Since it had fallen into his hands, how could he possibly give it up? Ling Han shook his head. After being poisoned by the red spot green bamboo fruit, even if he immediately treated himself, he might not be able to save his life. What more when Fei Yun was so careless and arrogant? He naturally would not remind him and calmly said, "If heaven wants your life, no one can stop it." Nonsense. Fei Yun was just about to scold him, but suddenly discovered that something was wrong. He felt an indescribable power suddenly begin to wreak havoc in his body, directly attacking his mind, filled with corrosive might. He pointed at Ling Han and was just about to speak when his whole body suddenly stopped. His whole body suddenly collapsed, but before he hit the ground, he had already turned into liquid, his body and spirit destroyed. This scene caused everyone's hair to stand on end. It was only a sword strike on his thigh, and it was not deep, only a graze, but it was actually able to take the life of a fifth Severance monarch tier. Too terrifying. Ling Han turned his right hand, and Xiao, the divine demon sword, immediately flew back to him. Because Fei Yun had died too quickly and too strangely, no one dared to stop him, afraid that they would also follow in Fei Yun's footsteps. They could only watch as the divine demon sword fell back into Ling Han's hands. Ling Han caught the divine demon sword, put it into the Black Tower, and calmly said, "Fine, didn't you guys want to break up the alliance? Then let's fight." His condition had not recovered to its peak, but these words were filled with domineering dominance, causing the blood of the people of the calm peace heaven to boil, and they felt their scalps go numb. If they wanted to fight, then fight. What were they afraid of? Come on. I'll beat you bastards to death. The prodigies of the calm peace heaven all roared. The main reason was that some people of the wide prosperity heaven were really too unscrupulous, not only burning the bridge after crossing it, but also stealing Ling Han's treasured sword, causing everyone to suppress a bellyful of anger. Now, Ling Han's words completely ignited their anger, and it was released with a bang. "Forget it, we are all people of the celestial realm, and we also have a common enemy, so it's best if we don't damage the harmony." Shu Yering came out to mediate. "Damage the harmony?" Yi Linfeng said darkly. "Fairy Shu, you've also arrived. Fei Yun has just died tragically in front of us, so how can we still coexist peacefully with the calm peace heaven?" "That's right, the prodigies of our wide prosperity heaven cannot die in vain. Moreover, that brat clearly had the ability to kill monsters, yet deliberately concealed his strength from the start, and tricked and killed a few prodigies of our wide prosperity heaven. His intentions are deserving of death." This was really an unreasonable argument. Shu Yering frowned slightly. She could see the big picture, but some things were not convenient to say, so she didn't know how to persuade them at this moment. Chapter 1976. Ling Han humphed softly and slashed out at Ji Wuming with his sword. Previously, he had to block the monarch tiers of the wide prosperity heaven and couldn't attack Ji Wuming. Now, even Shu Yareng was chasing after Ji Wuming, so he naturally had the time to attack. "Brat, it's not your turn yet." Ji Wuming's figure flashed, and he was like a fish going against the current in a huge wave. No matter how huge the wave was, he could easily pass through it. Ling Han hadn't recovered his full battle prowess, so he couldn't stop him at all. He saw Ji Wuming open his mouth, and that monarch tier of the calm peace heaven was swallowed whole. "You have something that I need." Ji Wuming stopped, his eyes fixed on Ling Han. "I need to save this kind of feast for last to slowly enjoy." He should have sensed the two source powers of heaven and earth, the Xianin source water and 9 heavens flame. However, being able to do so at the 5th severance, such a sensitive spirit was too astonishing. Who was this Ji Wuming? If Ling Han could have heard the conversation between Ji Wuming and Tang Minglong, then he would have come to a sudden realization. He was the reincarnation of a 9th heaven celestial king, so what if he had some abilities above his cultivation level? In the past, he had been a supreme being that could run amok in the celestial realm, so it would be strange if he didn't have some special techniques and abilities now. Ling Han, the Empress, Hu Niu, and Shu Yareng moved together and began to chase after Ji Wuming. If these 4 people joined forces, they should be invincible in the severing mundane tier. The truth was so. Ji Wuming didn't fight them head-on at all, and simply used his movement technique to attack others. His movement technique was as slippery as a fish, swimming freely under the attacks of the 4 people. Occasionally, when there was an attack that he couldn't dodge, he would swing his bow, hook, and block, dispersing the attack. Then he would calmly charge towards others. Ling Han and the others could only chase after him in vain, but couldn't do anything to him at all. Left with no choice, Ling Han could only draw Bewitching Maiden Row into the Black Tower, his heart filled with shock. They were all 5th severance, and it seemed like Ji Wuming's battle prowess wasn't particularly strong, but he was still toying with 4 peak monarch tiers. It would be futile to continue fighting like this. Ling Han slowed down his attacks and carefully observed Wuming Ji's every move. Gradually, he discovered something. Ji Wuming's realm was indeed the same as theirs, but his grasp of the laws had reached an extremely precise level. He was familiar with every minute change. Hence, when he was attacked, he was like a butcher dismembering an ox, easily dispelling the attack. However, although Ling Han knew this, he could do nothing about it. In fact, he could not even imitate it. This was built on an endless grasp of the laws, which required an endless amount of time to achieve. It was also like studying the true explanation of the Great Tao every day, mastering the basics of the laws to a proficient level. Xiao Chen could not help but be shocked. Ji Wuming's vital flame might only have lived for several tens of thousands of years, which was not much different from Xiao Chen's. However, in terms of their grasp of the laws, the difference between them was like the distance between heaven and earth. He was unable to accept this. Could it be that there really was a heaven-defying monster who needed only a few years to reach a height that others needed hundreds of millions of years to reach? One had to know that he was already at the level of a monster. Returning to that question, if Ling Han knew that Ji Wuming had been a 9th heaven celestial king, he would come to a sudden realization. 9th heaven celestial kings might have lived for several trillion years, or even several epochs. Then, what was strange about their grasp of the laws to an extremely precise level? There were fewer and fewer people on the battlefield. Furthermore, no one dared to flee, because the moment they left the protection of Ling Han and the others, they would be easily caught up by Ji Wuming and then swallowed. However, if they stayed on the battlefield, Ling Han and the others would not be able to completely protect them either. They would only be waiting for death instead of a quick death. This happened to Emperor Tears, causing them to feel gloomy and indignant. Which one of them was not a famous figure? In the future, even if they did not become celestial kings, they would definitely become ascending origin tier elites, yet they had actually fallen to such a state. Tragic. Only monarch tiers like Yan Xianlu, Shan Jitong, and Lao Song could survive. That was because without the interference of the wide prosperity heaven with their strength, they would be able to exchange a few blows with Ji Wuming, and they would be able to last until Ling Han and the others came to their rescue. Just like that, after a mere hour, aside from Ji Wuming, there were only 7 living people, and they were all monarch tears. Stop, Ji Wuming said calmly. It is impossible for you all to do anything to me, and I do not want to waste my trump cards on you all for the time being either. Why don't we all sit down and use this true explanation of great Tao? Dream on. Shu Yaring rebuked angrily, and continued to attack. Ling Han was also brimming with fighting spirit. This kind of opponent was too rare. He had gained greatly from battling with Ji Wuming. In terms of how to use regulations, Ji Wuming was a grandmaster. As long as Ling Han could catch up in terms of the details of regulations in the future, there would be an obvious increase in his strength. And the true explanation of great Tao was a treasure that could enrich the details. Yan Xianlu and the others also joined the ranks of the attackers. 7 great monarch tiers joined forces to battle Ji Wuming, but even so, Ji Wuming was still incredibly calm, and even occasionally posed a terrifying threat to Shan Jitong and Lao Song. These 2 were the obvious weakest of the 7, and were practically no match for Ji Wuming. The moment they were attacked, they would be in a perilous situation. In just a few exchanges, the 2 of them were wounded, their celestial blood flowing all over the ground, and they looked extremely wretched. Yan Xianlu had the thought of putting the 2 of them into his spatial god tool, but firstly, this would damage their pride, and secondly, putting them into the spatial god tool was not very safe. If the spatial god tool was snatched away by Ji Wuming, then Shan Jitong and Lao Song would be dead for sure. Thus, with these 2 restraining them, the battle prowess of Ling Han's group of 7 fell greatly, and they were led by the nose by Ji Wuming. This person's battle experience and awareness were all top-notch. This should be an instinctive reaction that had naturally formed after experiencing innumerable battles. There was already no need for him to think about how to battle. His body had long since made the most correct reaction. The more Ling Han fought, the more puzzled he became. He asked, "Who exactly are you?" "I am just a nobody," Ji Wuming said calmly. Then he swept an eye over Shu Yaring and said, "One last suggestion, how about you stop?" Ling Han was the first to stop. Though he very much wanted to defeat Ji Wuming, he really could not do anything to the latter. Of course, if it was a one-on-one battle, he was completely unafraid of the latter. First of all, could Ji Wuming tear through his defenses? Then he could unleash the might of the 9 heavens flame and Shen-Yin source water without any restraint. Most importantly, his present battle prowess had not recovered, and he could not borrow the power of the Black Tower either. Ling Han stopped, and the Empress and Hu Niu naturally stopped as well, though they too were very displeased. Then, Yan Xinlu and the others also stopped. Only Shu Yaring was still fighting, and she was extremely furious. At the foot of the Green Summit Mountain, the rabbit monster is in a daze, and by the side of the lightning river, the flood dragon is showing off its might. Ji Wuming suddenly said a few words without rhyme or reason. "You Wai." Shu Yaring's expression changed drastically, and her attacks suddenly stopped. Even her slender figure began to tremble, appearing to be incredibly agitated. Chapter 1977. Ji Wuming broke into a smile and said, "Little girl, let's not fight anymore, right?" "My lord." Shu Yaring suddenly knelt down, tears gushing out of her eyes. She was extremely excited. What was going on? As they fought, it became like they were acknowledging each other. Shu Yaring looked like she was prostrating herself on the ground, so if Ji Wuming wanted to kill her, she would probably just smile and wait to be slaughtered. From the looks of it, Shu Yaring seemed to be Ji Wuming's subordinate, but she was a monarch tier, and a top-notch one at that, so how could she be subordinate to someone else? Furthermore, Shu Yaring clearly did not recognize Ji Wuming at the beginning, at least not with her current identity. Only when he pointed it out did she come to a realization, and then burst into tears. Who was Ji Wuming? Not just that, but Shu Yaring should also have another identity. Ling Han frowned and said, "Don't just reminisce about the past. Don't you think you should explain?" "You're not qualified to know," Ji Wuming said calmly. Ji Wuming asked calmly, His eyes were fixed on Ling Han, and a golden dot appeared in his eyes. His gaze was profound, and he said, "Aside from the two source powers of heaven and earth, you should have something else on you. Moreover, it's even more valuable because I can't tell." Ling Han was stunned. What kind of monster was this? More valuable than the source power of heaven and earth, and he had definitely discovered the Black Tower. But Small Tower had said that as long as he did not actively use the Black Tower in front of celestial kings, he could not possibly be discovered. Of course, it was a low-level celestial king. But Ji Wuming was only a fifth severance, to say nothing of a high-level celestial king, so how could he discover the existence of the Black Tower? Yan Xianlu, Shan Jitong, and the others were also stunned. Ling Han actually had two source powers of heaven and earth? That was a source power of heaven and earth. Like divine metal, most celestial kings could only dream about it. But Ling Han, this severing mundane tier, not only had one, but two too. How could they believe that? Furthermore, there was a treasure even more valuable than the source power of heaven and earth. What was that? Yan Xianlu and the others could not imagine it. Ling Han calmed down and said, "The reincarnation of a celestial king?" He was not referring only to Ji Wuming, but also to Xu Yaring. Since there was Tang Minglong, who was suspected to be the reincarnation of an immortal king, why couldn't there be another Ji Wuming or Xu Yaring? Ji Wuming shook his head, clearly unwilling to say anything more. He just stared at Ling Han, his eyes growing brighter and brighter. "Even I can't see through such a secret treasure. I have some confidence." He retracted his gaze and strode towards the stone of the Great Tao. He sat down cross-legged and began to comprehend it. So carefree, so unguarded. However, as he sat there, his back was like a huge mountain that connected the heavens. Others could only look up at him, not daring to attack him. This was an aura that was domineering to the extreme. In his past life, this person was definitely a supreme great emperor who stood at the peak of the immortal Tao. Ling Han said in his mind, then communicated with Small Tower. "What do you think of this person?" Ling Han asked. "Extraordinary, very extraordinary." Small Tower spoke with a cautious tone. This was extremely rare. The Tsundra Tower had always been carefree and leisurely, taking pleasure in attacking him. Revealing this kind of cautious attitude was really rare. "His divine fetus is developing in the direction of perfection," Small Tower continued. "What do you mean?" Ling Han asked. "Divine fetus means that the ancestor has the blood of a celestial king flowing in it. In a certain life, it will suddenly return to its ancestry and possess a sliver of the power of a celestial king," Small Tower explained. It was rare that it didn't mock Ling Han's ignorance. Whatever regulations the ancestor of the celestial king cultivated, then the descendant will also possess the same regulations. This was very easy to understand. It was like how a chicken could only lay eggs. If it laid a duck egg, then it must have been done by the old king duck next door. However, the power of the divine fetus in this person is extremely heterogeneous. Logically speaking, this shouldn't exist. Small Tower revealed a look of confusion. However, on this person, the power of various divine fetus is currently fusing, all becoming his foundation. It seems like his divine fetus can obtain all the celestial king Taoist techniques. With the wisdom of so many predecessors, you can imagine how strong his foundation will be. Why do you need to collect more source power of heaven and earth before becoming a celestial king? It's to build a solid foundation so that when you become a celestial king, you can soar into the sky. And this is also the case for him. There are 9 heavens in the celestial king tier, and each step is like ascending to the heavens. However, if he can grasp all the techniques in the world once he becomes a celestial king, then perhaps a first heaven celestial king can kill a third heaven celestial king. If he said these words, he would probably be laughed to death. Who didn't know that the 9 heavens of the celestial king tier was very strict? A second heaven would definitely crush a first heaven, which was equivalent to a dividing soul tier beating a severing mundane tier. That was like a father beating his son, and the son could only take the beating. Now, he actually said that a first heaven celestial king could not only defeat a third heaven celestial king, but could even kill one? Wasn't this laughable? However, Ling Han didn't have the slightest intention of laughing. Ji Wuming must have been a celestial king in his previous life, and a high-level celestial king at that. Now, he was reincarnated, so if he wasn't the strongest, what was he? He was just guessing according to his own train of thought, and just happened to be right. Blazing fighting spirit rose in Ling Han's heart. He definitely had to defeat this person. He had to defeat him fair and square, and not use the power of the Black Tower or the poisonous fruit of the spotted red bamboo to kill him. This person could elevate his martial art intent. That's more like it. Small Tower nodded, giving affirmation to Ling Han's idea. Don't pry into my thoughts, you perverted tower. If it weren't for the fact that I'm connected to your mind, do you think I would be willing to listen to your dirty thoughts? Small Tower retorted. Ling Han ignored Small Tower, and also strode towards the stone tablet of true explanation of Great Tao. Then, he sat down in a cross-legged position, and began to comprehend it. With Ling Han leading the way, the Empress and Hun Yo also walked over. He then released Bewitching Maiden Ro, and together with Yan Xianlu and the others, they all arrived in front of the stone tablet. However, Yan Xianlu and the others were still filled with wariness, fearing that Ji Wuming would suddenly rise in revolt. As if sensing the thoughts of the three of them, Ji Wuming suddenly turned around and grinned, scaring Shan Jitong and Lao Song so much that they almost wet their pants. Yan Xianlu also leaped up, assuming a defensive stance. Ji Wuming turned around, and continued to comprehend the true explanation of Great Tao, as if he was only giving these three a scare. But because of this, Yan Xianlu and the others did not dare to get too close. They had to maintain a sufficient distance from that massive monster. Otherwise, who would they look for if they were eaten? However, one had to get close to the true explanation of Great Tao in order to understand it clearly. This was concealed by some mysterious power of heaven and earth, and it was definitely not something that one could understand clearly just by obtaining it. This drove Yan Xianlu and the others crazy. Shu Yaring was kneeling respectfully behind Ji Wuming like a maidservant, and it was truly astounding. Was she still the number 2 expert of Wide Prosperity Heaven's younger generation? Or the number 1 beauty? 3 days later, Ji Wuming stood up and glanced at Ling Han. Take care of yourself. The next time we meet, I will take all the good fortune you have. Ling Han opened his eyes and retorted, After I defeat you, I will spare your life. In comparison, he was more domineering and confident. So what if I spare your life? No matter how hard you chase after me, you will never be a match for me. Haha. Ji Wuming laughed loudly and swaggered off. They are tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.